Lena Vasquez did not sleep the night before claiming season opened. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling with both arms crossed tight over her chest, listening to the wind move through the pine trees outside her window, counting every sound the house made as it settled. Her best friend Clara had called 3 times that evening. She had ignored all 3, not because she was angry, because she knew exactly what Clara would say, and she did not want to hear it out loud. The PAC notice had come 2 weeks ago. It had been posted on the community board at the center of Crestwood, their territory, the same way all official PAC announcements were posted. Clean white paper, neat black lettering, the Alpha's seal stamped at the bottom. Most of the young women in the PAC had gathered around it within minutes of it going up. They had stood there in groups of 2 and 3, reading it and then reading it again, whispering to each other with their heads tilted together, hands pressed over their mouths. Some of them were excited, some of them were nervous, all of them were something. Lena had walked past the board without stopping. She already knew what the notice said. She had known it was coming for months. Alpha Cole announced claiming season at the same time every 3 years, and every time he did, the same cycle started. Young wolves found their bonds, mates were claimed, ceremonies were held. Life rearranged itself around whatever the bond decided. The PAC called it beautiful. The PAC called it destiny. Lena called it a trap that people had spent centuries convincing themselves they wanted to fall into. She turned onto her side and looked at the empty side of the room. Her sister Mara had lived in this room with her until Mara was 21. They had shared the space since childhood, 2 beds pushed against opposite walls, a window between them, a small desk they had argued over for years. Mara had decorated her half with photographs and pressed flowers and a string of yellow lights that she kept on even while she slept. Lena's half had a bookshelf full of biology textbooks, a corkboard with notes and class schedules pinned to it, and exactly 1 photograph, the 2 of them at the edge of Crestwood Lake, taken years ago when Lena was 12 and Mara was 16, both of them laughing at something that had long since been forgotten. Mara had been gone for 4 years. Not gone the way death takes people, gone the way bonding takes people. Her mate, a quiet man from the Western Ridge PAC named Daniel, had claimed her 3 days after claiming season opened during the cycle 4 years ago. The bond had been immediate and certain, the kind that left no room for argument. Mara had smiled through the whole ceremony. She had cried, but she had said they were happy tears, and maybe they were. Lena had believed her. What Lena could not stop thinking about, lying in the dark now, was the visit she had made to Mara 2 summers ago. Mara's home was a small house on the western side of the Ridge territory. It had a garden and a porch and a kitchen that always smelled like something good was being made. Mara had shown her around it with a kind of careful pride, pointing out the things she had chosen herself, the curtains, the color of the walls, the arrangement of furniture. Lena had sat down at the kitchen table and watched her sister make tea, and the whole time, a feeling had grown in her chest that she could not name right away. It was not until she was driving home, an hour later, that she understood what it had been. Mara had asked Daniel before she made the tea, just whether he wanted any. A simple, small thing. But she had asked in a voice that was slightly different from the voice she used with Lena. A voice that was waiting for permission that it did not realize it was waiting for. And Daniel had said sure, and Mara had relaxed in a way that meant she had been slightly tense, and none of it was dramatic, none of it was something anyone would point to. But Lena had seen it. Lena had felt it in the room the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Her sister had not done that before the bond. Mara used to be the loudest person in any room. She used to have opinions about everything and share all of them at high volume. She used to pick arguments with their father about PAC politics and win half of them. Now she made tea quietly and waited. Lena pressed her face into her pillow. She was not saying Daniel was a bad person. She was not saying Mara was unhappy. She was saying that something had shifted, something had changed, and that change had happened because Mara had allowed the bond to make her smaller, bit by bit, without noticing. Because that was what happened. Not always, not to everyone, but often enough that it was a pattern, and Lena had seen the pattern in too many of the mated women in her PAC to dismiss it as coincidence. She had made her decision a long time ago, even before that visit. The visit had just made the decision harder and more solid, the way iron gets harder when it cools. No bond, no claim, not this season, not ever, if she could manage it. The problem, she knew as she finally fell toward the edges of sleep, was that the bond did not ask for your permission. The bond was not something you agreed to. It arrived the way weather arrived, and you either dealt with it or you didn't. She planned to deal with it. Clara was waiting on the front steps when Lena came outside the next morning. She was sitting with her knees pulled up, a coffee cup in each hand, her dark curly hair still slightly wild from sleep. She held one of the cups out without saying anything. Lena took it, sat down beside her, and looked out at the morning. Crestwood was beautiful in the early hours. The territory sat in a wide valley surrounded by forest, and when the mist came in overnight it stayed close to the ground until the sun burned it off, so mornings looked like the ground was breathing. Lena had grown up watching this mist, and it had never stopped making her feel something she couldn't quite describe. A kind of enormous calm that sat right next to an enormous ache, like beauty that you know you can't keep. So, Clara said. So, Lena said. Season opens today. I'm aware. You're not going to the opening ceremony. I was not planning to. Clara turned her cup in her hands. She was not arguing, which meant she had already decided arguing was useless. That was one of the things Lena loved most about her. Clara read the room faster than anyone she had ever met, and when she saw that a wall was solid, she stopped walking into it. She just stood there and looked for a door. Your dad called me, Clara said. I know, I saw. He's worried. He's hopeful, Lena said. Those are different things. Clara looked at her sideways. They're not always different. Lena drank her coffee and did not respond to that. Her father, Victor, had been gently, persistently, quietly pushing the idea of bonding at her for 2 years. He was not cruel about it. He was not demanding. He was just a man who had loved her mother deeply, who had lost her to an illness when Lena was 15, who believed with his whole heart that the bond was the best thing life had to offer. He could not understand why his youngest daughter looked at that belief and turned away from it. She had tried to explain, once. The conversation had gone in circles and ended with both of them tired and nothing resolved, and they had not tried again. I made a decision, Lena said. I'm going to stay out of anything that puts me in proximity to potential mates during the first week. I figure the early bonds happen fast. If I can get through the first week without triggering anything, the pressure drops. Clara stared at her. You made a schedule for avoiding your own fate. I made a practical plan. Lena. Clara. You know you can't outplan this. I'm going to try. Clara exhaled slowly, a long breath that meant she had many things to say, and was choosing to say none of them. Then she bumped her shoulder against Lena's, and took a long sip of her coffee. Fine. What do you need me to do? This was the other thing Lena loved about her. She always ended up on the right side. Just be around, Lena said. If I need to leave somewhere fast, I want backup. You want me to be your getaway driver from Destiny? Essentially, yes. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever agreed to. Thank you. Clara laughed, short and genuine, and the mist was still doing its thing over the valley floor, and Lena sat there with her coffee and told herself she was ready. She told herself the plan was solid. She told herself she had thought of everything. She had not thought of everything, but she did not know that yet. The first day of claiming season passed quietly. Lena went to the Pack library and spent 6 hours reading. She had a research paper she was supposed to be finishing for the Regional Biology Consortium, a study on plant adaptation at altitude, and she had been neglecting it for 2 weeks. Working on it felt like proof that she was a person with a life and a direction, that there were things she was doing that mattered beyond the season calendar. She was deep into her notes by the afternoon when the library door opened and 2 women from her pack walked in, Diane and Portia, both 23, both already talking loudly about who had triggered their bond that morning. Diane was glowing in the way that people glowed when something enormous had happened to them that they hadn't been expecting. Portia was listening and nodding with wide eyes and a smile that kept threatening to take over her whole face. They settled into a table near Lena's without seeing her, or perhaps without registering her, and they kept talking, their voices low but carrying in the quiet of the room. Lena looked back at her notes. She was not jealous. She was sure of that. What she felt was more complicated than jealousy. It was something like watching people board a train she had decided not to take, knowing the train was heading somewhere real and that the people on it were not wrong to go, just knowing with absolute certainty that she was not going with them. The certainty felt good. The certainty felt clean. She went home as the sun was going low and found her father in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up when she walked in, and the expression on his face told her he had been waiting to see how the day would land on her. She kissed him on the cheek, told him the research was going well, took a bowl of whatever he was making, and went to her room. She ate at her desk and read until late. She felt fine. 4 days passed. No bond, no trigger, no moment in which the air rearranged itself around another person and told her she had found her match. Lena moved through the first week of claiming season the way a person moves through a crowd when they are very good at not being touched, with attention, with deliberateness, with a constant low-level awareness of distance. She avoided the community hall where the opening ceremonies had been held. She avoided the East Meadow where bonded pairs traditionally spent time in the early days after recognizing each other. She stuck to the library, to her own yard, to Clara's apartment, to the forest trails on the north edge of the territory where it was unlikely she would run into anyone. She was so focused on avoiding the wolves of her own pack that she forgot to think about the wolves who were coming from outside it. The announcement was made on the 5th day of the season. Alpha Cole called a pack assembly at the community hall. Not optional, everyone expected. Lena went because not going would have drawn more attention than going. She sat in the back row next to Clara and kept her eyes on the floor. The announcement was simple. A delegation from the Northern Territories would be arriving in 3 days. The Alpha King of the North, whose name was Cale Doran, was visiting to review the long-standing treaty between the Northern Pack Alliance and the Central Territories, of which Crestwood was a part. The visit had been scheduled for months. The timing, with claiming season, was a coincidence. At least, that was what Cole said. Lena looked at Clara. Clara looked at Lena. Neither of them said anything. But Lena's stomach did something she did not appreciate. A small, sharp movement, like a key turning somewhere it had no business turning. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was anxious about the political situation, about having outsiders in the territory during a sensitive time, about the logistics and the disruption. She had a full list of sensible explanations, and she sorted through all of them carefully on the walk home. By the time she reached her front door, she had convinced herself completely. The feeling was nothing. The key was nothing. The turn in her stomach was just dinner. She went inside. She locked the door. She went to bed early. She lay there for a long time in the dark with her arms crossed tight over her chest, just as she had on the very first night of the season, listening to the wind in the pines and counting the sounds the house made as it settled. Outside, somewhere on the north road, the lights of a convoy moved slowly through the trees. Coming closer. She did not know that yet, but some part of her that was older and quieter than her plans already did. She was in the pack library again the next morning, earlier than usual, before Diane and Portia arrived and before anyone else had reason to be there. The morning light came in through the high windows at an angle that turned the dust in the air gold, and the room smelled like old paper and the faint ghost of pine. And Lena sat at her usual table with her research notes spread out in front of her and tried to care about altitude adaptation. She could not care about altitude adaptation. She kept picking up her pen and putting it back down. She kept reading the same paragraph and coming to the end of it without retaining a word. She got up and made herself a cup of the terrible library tea, the kind that came in a box and tasted like warm cardboard, and stood at the window while she drank it, looking out at the main road that ran through the center of Crestwood. It was a Thursday. Thursdays in Crestwood were slow. The market ran on Wednesday mornings and the pack social was held on Saturday evenings, and Thursday sat between them doing nothing in particular. Usually she liked Thursdays for exactly this reason. Today the quietness felt like waiting. She turned back to her table. She sat down. She picked up her pen. The library door opened. She did not look up. She had made a rule, in the first days of the season, about not looking up when doors opened. It was a small discipline, but it mattered. If you looked up, you met eyes. If you met eyes, things happened. She kept her gaze on her notes and heard footsteps, the sound of a bag being set down 2 tables away, the creak of a chair. Then nothing. Whoever it was settled into quiet. That was fine. That was good. The library was a place for quiet. She found her place in her paragraph and started again. 15 minutes passed. She actually read 3 pages. She made a note in the margin about temperature variance and felt briefly like a person who was handling everything. Is the historical section in the back? The voice was not loud. It was low and unhurried, with a slight northern accent on certain vowels, the kind of accent that came from open, cold places. It was the kind of voice that assumed it would be heard without needing to be raised. Lena looked up. The man standing 2 tables away was tall in a way that seemed functional rather than decorative, like height that had been built for use rather than appearance. He was looking at the shelves along the far wall, not at her, with his hands loose at his sides and his weight slightly forward, like he was about to take a step. He wore dark clothes, no pack insignia visible, though there was something about the way he stood that made insignia unnecessary. He had not looked at her yet. Lena opened her mouth to answer and discovered she did not immediately have a voice to do it with. She cleared her throat. Far end, she said. Past the natural science section. There's a sign. He turned to look at her then, just briefly, just to acknowledge the answer. Thank you, he said. And then he walked to the back of the library and disappeared around the corner. Lena sat very still. Nothing had happened. A man had asked about the historical section. She had answered. That was all. That was the complete list of what had occurred. She looked back at her notes. The paragraph she had been reading had vanished from her mind completely. She sat there for a moment, then wrote a single word in her margin, looked at it, and crossed it out. She did not finish her research that morning. She packed up her things 40 minutes earlier than she normally would have, and walked home a different way than usual, through the market square instead of along the main road, and told herself very firmly that she was leaving because she had done enough work for the morning, and not for any other reason. She was, in this moment, not telling herself the truth, but the lie was a comfortable one, and she was very good at comfortable lies, and so she wore it home like a coat, and hung it on the hook by the door, and made herself lunch, and did not think about the voice in the library at all. She did not think about it even once. Not even a little. The delegation from the Northern Territories arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 vehicles moving down the main road through Crestwood in a line, quiet and controlled. Lena watched them from the second-floor window of Clara's apartment, standing just far enough back from the glass that she could see without being seen. Clara stood beside her with her arms folded and her head tilted, watching with open curiosity. The one in front, Clara said. I see him, Lena said. That's the Alpha King. I know who he is. Just making sure. Lena said nothing. She watched the lead vehicle slow and stop outside the community hall, where Alpha Cole and 3 of the PAC's senior council members were waiting to receive the delegation. The doors opened. People climbed out. And then Cale Doran stepped out of the front vehicle and stood on the road in the morning light. He was the same man from the library. Of course he was. She had known it from the moment she heard the voice, and chosen not to admit it to herself. She had told herself many things in the days since the library. She had told herself that she had not recognized him. She had told herself that she had never even properly seen his face, which was almost true given that he had only looked at her for a moment. She had told herself that the way she had been unable to read her notes afterward was about the terrible library tea and insufficient sleep. She had built herself a very complete set of explanations, and she had lived inside them comfortably for 2 days. Now he was standing 40 feet below her window, and every one of those explanations quietly packed its bags and left. He moved differently than the people around him, not faster, not slower, differently, like he occupied space with intention. The people near him adjusted their positions without noticing they were doing it, the way water in a stream adjusts around a stone. Alpha Cole stepped forward to shake his hand, and Cale Doran received the greeting with a nod that was respectful but not deferential, and something about that small calibration told Lena more about him than an hour of description could have. He was not here to impress anyone. He was here because he had agreed to be here, and that was the extent of what this was. She appreciated that, in a detached, observational way. She was a scientist. She noticed things. Noting that a person carried themselves with honesty was not the same as being drawn to them. She noted it the same way she noted the species composition of a forest. Useful information, nothing more. Clara made a small sound beside her. What? Lena asked. Nothing, Clara said, in the voice that meant something. If you have a comment, make it. I don't have a comment, I have an observation. Then make your observation. Your hands, Clara said, are gripping the windowsill. Lena looked down. Both her hands were pressed flat against the edge of the sill, with more pressure than the situation required. She released them and stepped back from the window. Cold up here, she said. I was steadying myself. Right, Clara said. Absolutely. Cold window. Makes sense. Lena picked up her jacket from the chair. I'm going to the library. Of course you are. She did not go to the library. She went to the forest trail on the north side of the territory instead, because the trail was empty, and the trees were tall, and the ground under her feet was soft, and she could walk fast without running into anything that required a social response. She walked for an hour at a pace that was not quite running but was faster than walking usually needed to be, and by the time she stopped and leaned against a pine tree with her hands on her knees, she felt slightly more like herself. She was not bonded to him. She knew what a bond felt like. She had been close enough to friends and pack members in the moment of their bonding to feel it like a change in the temperature of the air around them. Nothing like that had happened in the library. Nothing like that had happened this morning. She was not bonded. She was not triggered. She was simply a person who had noticed that another person was interesting, and that was allowed. That was normal. That was something that happened to everyone and meant nothing. She pushed off from the tree and kept walking. He would be here for the treaty review period. Alpha Cole had said 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity of the discussions. That was manageable. She could be in the same territory as a person she found interesting for 3 to 4 weeks without it becoming a problem. She had done harder things. She had a list of harder things she could recite if she needed reminding. She walked back to the main road as the afternoon was going orange. Clara called twice. She answered the second one. "Where did you go?" Clara asked. "North Trail." "For how long?" "A while." Lena. "I'm fine, Clara. I went for a walk, that's all." There was a pause. Then Clara said, "The delegation is having dinner at the community hall tonight. All PAC members are invited." Lena stopped walking. "I know. You're not going. I was not planning to." Another pause, longer. "Okay," Clara said finally. "Okay, I'll bring you food. You don't have to do that." "I know. I'm going to anyway. See you at 7. She hung up before Lena could argue. Lena stood on the road with the phone in her hand and the orange light doing its evening work on everything around her, and felt a sharp, brief spike of affection for Clara that made her chest ache slightly. She went home. She changed her clothes. She sat at her desk and worked on her research for 3 hours, and it went surprisingly well. The kind of work session where the ideas come easy, and the notes arrange themselves in ways that make sense, and she was almost grateful for it. Clara arrived at 7, with 2 containers of the food from the community hall dinner. Roast lamb and potatoes, and the kind of bread that only ever appeared at official PAC functions, thick and slightly sweet. They ate at Lena's kitchen table, and Clara talked about the dinner and who had been there, and what the northern delegation was like, and Lena listened and ate and asked occasional questions that were purely informational. "He sat at the head table with Cole," Clara said. "They talked the whole meal. He's got this way of listening, like he's actually absorbing what you say rather than just waiting for you to stop. Useful quality in a treaty negotiation," Lena said. "Sure," Clara said, "among other things." Lena pointed her fork at her. "Do not. I'm not doing anything. You have a face. I have the same face I always have. You have the face you make when you think you know something I don't." Clara smiled and took a piece of bread. "I talked to Portia tonight. Apparently 3 different women in the PAC triggered bond responses, just from being in the room with him during the dinner." She said this casually. "The way you say something you know is going to land hard, and are watching to see where it lands." Lena kept eating. "That's not unusual. Alpha King level bonds are more immediate. It's a biological function of dominance ranking. It doesn't mean anything about the individual." "Right," Clara said. "Biology. Got it." They finished dinner. They cleaned up together. Clara left at 9 with a hug that lasted a beat longer than usual, and Lena closed the door and stood in the hallway of her quiet house for a moment. 3 women had triggered bond responses just from proximity. She had been in the library with him for 40 minutes. She had not triggered a bond response. She was sure of it. She would have known. Everyone knew. It was not a subtle thing. She went to her room. She got into bed. She pulled the blanket up. 3 women. 40 minutes. She turned off the light and lay in the dark and focused on breathing slowly, and told the part of her that was doing arithmetic to please stop. The next morning she went to get her own coffee from the small shop on the east side of the market square, the one with the good beans and the owner who never made conversation, which was the exact kind of coffee shop she needed on days when she was preemptively tired. She ordered her usual and stood to one side to wait, looking out the front window at the morning activity on the square. He was outside. He was standing at the edge of the square with a cup of something, and looking at the forest line in the way that people look at something when they are thinking about something else entirely. He was alone, which surprised her. She had assumed the Alpha King of the Northern Territories would move through the world with an entourage. He seemed to move through it like he was just a person who happened to be in a place. The owner set her coffee on the counter. She picked it up. She turned toward the door. She stopped. The sensible thing was to leave through the side door, the one that opened onto the alley, which was slightly less convenient, but which would mean she did not have to walk past him. She stood there with her coffee and thought about the side door. She walked out the front. The square was not large. She crossed it at an angle that would take her away from him, not toward him, and she was almost past the fountain in the center when she heard, behind her, a voice she already knew. "You're the one from the library," he said. She stopped. She turned around. He was not smiling. He was just looking at her, the way he had looked at the forest, with full attention and no apparent performance. His coffee cup was in his right hand and his head was tilted slightly, like he was continuing a thought. "I am," she said. "I went back the next day," he said. The historical section was very useful. She did not know what to do with that information. "Good," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You're not at the PAC functions," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement, like he had noticed and found it worth noting. "I've been working," she said. The Alpha mentioned there would be an informal gathering tomorrow evening. He said pack members who work in research are specifically invited, something about land use discussions. Lena looked at him. He looked back at her. He was, she realized with a resignation that felt almost peaceful, the most careful person she had ever met. Not careful in the nervous sense, careful in the sense of a craftsman, someone who measured twice and moved with deliberateness and did not say things by accident. The invitation he had just extended was not casual. He knew it wasn't casual. She knew it wasn't casual. "I'll consider it," she said. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something before a smile. "That's something," he said. She turned and walked away. She did not look back. She was extremely disciplined about not looking back. She made it all the way to the end of the square and around the corner of the bakery, and then she stopped and pressed her back against the wall and drank half her coffee in one go. She stood there for a moment. Then she very carefully and deliberately made the decision not to go to the gathering tomorrow. The decision felt absolutely solid. She was almost certain she would keep it. She went to the gathering. She stood in front of her wardrobe for 20 minutes, telling herself she was not going, and then she put on the gray dress she had owned for 2 years, and worn exactly once, and went. She told Clara first, because Clara would find out anyway, and it was better to control the information than to be ambushed by it. Clara's response was a single text message, a small drawing of a flame. Lena stared at it, rolled her eyes, and put her phone in her bag. The gathering was held in the smaller room attached to the community hall, less formal than the main hall, with low lighting and long wooden tables covered in food, and the kind of comfortable noise that comes from a room full of people who are genuinely talking rather than performing conversation. Lena came in through the side entrance and took a glass of water and positioned herself near the group of pack researchers she knew professionally, 5 or 6 people who had been involved in various land use and environmental studies across the territory. It was a sensible place to be. It was where she would have stood regardless. She did not look around the room for him. She talked to Owen about his migration study. She talked to Priya about the water table data that had come in last month. She ate something from a plate and listened to a story about a permit application that had gone wrong and made appropriate noises at the appropriate moments. She was being completely normal. She was, in fact, the most normal person in the room. Dr. Vasquez. She had not heard him approach. He was simply there, at the edge of the group, addressing her by a title that only a few people in Crestwood used. She had her degree, and most of the pack treated it as a background fact rather than a form of address. The word in his voice was not flattering. It was accurate. It was recognition. "Mr. Doran," she said. Something very small shifted in his expression. "Cale," he said. She did not say his name back. She was not ready to say his name. "This is Owen," she said instead, gesturing. "He runs our migration study, and Priya, who handles the water data." She completed the introductions around the group with the smooth efficiency of a person who had been buying time with good manners. Cale Doran shook hands and asked Owen a question about the migration patterns, a genuine question, specific and informed, and Owen lit up the way people light up when someone asks about their work as though the answer matters. Lena watched the exchange from the corner of her eye. He knew something about migration. He knew something, she realized as the conversation continued, about most of the things the group talked about over the next 20 minutes. Land management, water systems, pack territory maintenance. He asked more than he answered, but the questions were precise enough to reveal what he already understood. She found herself speaking more than she intended. That was the thing about the way he listened. He listened in a way that made speaking feel worthwhile, and she was not accustomed to that. In most conversations, she was the one doing the listening, because she was good at it, and because it was safer than talking. With him, the dynamic shifted without her noticing, and she was 3 sentences into explaining her altitude adaptation research before she caught what was happening and slowed down. He was watching her with a focus that was not intrusive but was entirely present. "How long has the study been running?" he asked. 2 years, she said. "And the preliminary results?" She thought about deflecting. She thought about giving a short, vague answer that communicated nothing. She looked at his face and saw that he was actually asking. "Significant variance in adaptation speed depending on soil composition," she said. "The plants in the higher nitrogen zones are adapting almost twice as fast as the models predicted, which suggests that the current models are undervaluing chemical environment as a factor relative to temperature and altitude." He nodded slowly, "And that matters for territory maintenance because if the plants in the upper altitude zones are adapting ahead of schedule, the grazing and hunting patterns are going to shift earlier than we've planned for, which means the sustainable yield calculations are probably off." He looked at her for a moment. Then, have you presented this to Alpha Cole? She smiled without warmth. I submitted a report 6 months ago. It's in a queue. He said nothing to that. His expression did not change in a performative way. He did not make a face of sympathy or outrage or any of the social responses people made to demonstrate they were on your side. He just noted what she had said, like he was filing it somewhere. She found that more affecting than outrage would have been. The evening ended gradually, the way good evenings do, people beginning to make their way out one by one, conversations winding to their natural ends. Lena collected her jacket and said her goodbyes to Owen and Priya and moved toward the side entrance. She was almost through the door when she heard him behind her. "The report," he said. "Can I read it?" She turned. He was a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and he was asking the question as simply as he had asked about the historical section, like it was obvious, like it had not occurred to him that it might be complicated. "Why?" she said. "Because it's relevant to territorial land agreements," he said, "which is what I'm here to review." That was true. That was completely straightforwardly true. She could not find a hole in it. "I'll send it to the delegation contact address," she said. "Send it directly," he said. He reached into his pocket and produced a card. Plain, just a name and a private address. He held it out. She took it. Their fingers did not touch. She was very glad about that. She walked to her car. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside and thought about the card in her jacket pocket. She was not going to send the report, or she was going to send it only because it was professionally appropriate and she would send it with no further communication and that would be the end of it. She went inside. She made tea. She sat at her desk and opened her email. She sent the report. She sat back and looked at the screen. She was absolutely handling this completely fine. The reply came the next morning. 6 sentences. He had read the report. He had 3 specific questions about the nitrogen data. He asked if she would be willing to discuss them before the week was out. He signed it with only his first name. She read the email 4 times and told herself she was assessing it for professional context. Then she replied. 1 paragraph. Factual. Noting that she was available Thursday afternoon. She sent it before she could think about whether to send it. The week between that email and Thursday was the most productive week of research she had in months. She worked in a kind of focused energy that she recognized as the feeling of having something to look forward to while also refusing to acknowledge what it was. She wrote 14 pages of analysis notes. She restructured the second section of her research paper entirely. She rearranged her bookshelf, which was not research-related but which happened during a writing break and which somehow felt equally essential. Clara called on Wednesday evening. "You seem different." "I'm in a good stretch with the research," Lena said. "Right," Clara said. "Nothing else going on?" "Nothing else." A pause. "Priya mentioned you talked to the Alpha King for almost 40 minutes at the gathering." "We discussed land use data. It was professionally relevant." "For 40 minutes. He asked good questions." Another pause. Longer. "Lena, be honest with me." Lena was quiet for a moment. She was at her desk, the lamp on, the night dark outside her window, a half-finished cup of tea going cold near her elbow. "I'm going to meet with him Thursday to discuss the nitrogen data in my report." "Okay," Clara said carefully. "It's a professional meeting." "I believe you. I have everything under control." The pause that followed was the softest, most careful pause Clara had ever deployed. Then, "Okay, good. Call me Thursday night." "I will. Not to report, just to talk." Lena picked up her tea. "I know," she said. "I will." Thursday arrived in the way that days arrive when you have been measuring the distance to them, both sooner and later than expected, the morning too bright, and the hours moving at the wrong speed. She dressed in her usual work clothes and ate breakfast and walked to the community hall where they had agreed to meet in one of the smaller council rooms. The room had a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out at the back garden, and she arrived first and sat with her notebook open and her research binder on the table, and her hands folded over the top of it. She looked at her hands. She unfolded them and put them in her lap. He arrived 3 minutes after her, with a folder of his own and without an aide or assistant, which she noted. Most senior officials she had ever dealt with moved through the world with support around them. He moved alone. She was beginning to think this was intentional. "Thank you for this," he said, sitting across from her. "It's useful data for your review," she said. "It makes sense to go over it." He opened his folder. She opened her binder. And then something happened that she had not anticipated. The conversation became easy. Not easy in the way of small talk. Not easy in the way of pleasant nothing. Easy in the way of 2 people who were thinking about the same problem and were well matched for the thinking of it. He had read the report carefully. She could tell from his questions, which went to the parts of the analysis that were most uncertain, the places where she herself was not yet sure of the conclusions. He pushed on the nitrogen data with exactly the right kind of pressure, and she pushed back, and they revised two of the preliminary conclusions together, in ways that were better than either of them had arrived at alone. They worked for 2 hours. At some point she realized she had moved her chair slightly to get a better angle on the table, and was now sitting approximately 18 inches away from where she had started, and that the distance between her chair and his had decreased accordingly. She noticed this and did not move back because moving back would have required an explanation. He did not move back either. When the data was done, when the questions had been answered and the revisions had been made, and the next steps for her analysis were clear and written in her notebook, he sat back in his chair and looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You're very good at this," he said. She was good at many things and did not require compliments to know it, but something about the way he said it, without elaboration, without the usual social scaffolding of flattery, just a direct statement of what he had observed, reached her somewhere she had not planned to be reachable. "The report should have been reviewed 6 months ago," he said. "Yes," she said, "it should have." He looked out the window at the back garden. "I've seen this in Central Territories before. Research gets produced, goes into the queue, sits there. The decisions that should be informed by it get made anyway, just without the information." He paused. "It's the kind of inefficiency that doesn't look like a problem until something goes wrong. And then it looks like a very large problem," Lena said. "Yes." He turned back to her. "The land use section of the treaty review. I want to include updated sustainable yield projections. Based on this." He tapped the folder. She stared at him. "The review is for the existing treaty. Reviews can incorporate new information. That's what makes them reviews rather than confirmation ceremonies." She thought about what that would mean. Her data, which had been sitting in a queue for 6 months, actually informing a territorial agreement between pack alliances, something that would have consequences, real ones. "The Alpha would need to approve including it," she said. "I'll discuss it with him." He closed his folder. "With your permission." The phrase was precise and unusual. Not "I'll use your data." "With your permission." She looked at him. He looked back. And there was nothing performed in his expression, no charm, no effort toward a specific effect. He was just a person who had asked a question and was waiting for the answer. "Yes," she said. "With my permission, go ahead." He nodded once. They gathered their materials. They stood. They both reached for the door at the same time. Not the same handle. Not anything dramatic, but close enough that they both stopped, and there was a beat of stillness in the room that had nothing to do with the research. She stepped back. He opened the door. She walked out into the hall. "Thursday next week," he said, behind her. "If you'd be willing. There are 3 more sections of the report I'd like to go through." She was already walking down the hall. "I'll check my schedule," she said. She did not check her schedule. She had already cleared Thursday. She had cleared it on Monday, telling herself it was because she had a lot of writing to do and needed the uninterrupted time. She was going to have to start telling herself better lies. She met with him the following Thursday, and the one after that. By the 3rd meeting they had stopped using the formal council room and had moved to the smaller table in the back garden, because the weather was good and the light was better and the garden was quieter, and neither of them commented on the relocation as though it required comment. They had coffee instead of just water. At some point during the 2nd week, she started bringing the coffee. 2 cups from the East Side shop, his order memorized without her consciously memorizing it, and he started bringing something for her to eat, because she had mentioned once, in passing, that she sometimes forgot lunch when she was working, and she did not mention that no one had ever remembered that detail and acted on it before. She had made rules at the start of claiming season. No alone time with potential mates, no eye contact longer than 2 seconds, no letting kindness in. She had broken all 3 rules. She had broken them so gradually and so naturally that she had not noticed the breaking. She had simply arrived, one Thursday at a time, at a place that was very far from where she had started. The bond had not triggered. She needed to keep saying that. The bond had not triggered. She would have known. Whatever this was, this Thursday thing, this garden table thing, this coffee and data thing, it was not a bond. It was something she was choosing, which made it entirely different, which made it hers to control. The rules, however, were gone. She sat in her room on Friday night, after the 3rd Thursday meeting, and had the first completely honest conversation with herself that she had managed in several weeks. She liked him. Not the way you like someone you met at a party. Not the way you like a colleague with good professional instincts. She liked him the way you like something that has started to organize itself around you without your permission. The way a habit forms, or a preference settles, or a piece of music becomes the one you put on when everything else is too much. She liked him, and it scared her more than any bond trigger would have, because it was hers. It was not biology. It was not destiny. It was a choice she was making, slowly, without acknowledging it. And she had exactly no idea what to do about that. She sat with it for a long time. Then she opened her notebook and started writing a new section of her research, and wrote until the feeling had settled into the background where she could manage it, and went to bed at 2 a.m. with ink on her fingers, and the sense that something was changing under her life the way the ground changes before anything visible shifts. She fell asleep faster than she expected. She dreamed about the garden, the light, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. She woke up and did not remember the dream, which was fine. It was better that way. Her father noticed on Saturday. He noticed in the way that fathers who are paying attention notice things, not through any dramatic revelation but through the small adjustments a person makes when they are carrying something new. Lena came down to breakfast and she was not thinking about the research. She was thinking about something, but it was not the research. And Victor Vasquez, who had known his younger daughter for 22 years, could tell the difference. He said nothing about it at breakfast. He made eggs and toast and poured her coffee, and they talked about the local news and the garden wall that needed repair, and a book he had been reading. She helped him clean up and kissed him on the cheek before leaving, and he watched her go with the expression of a man who had filed something carefully away. He called her that evening. "The Northern delegation," he said. "They seem to be making a good impression on the pack." "They're professional," Lena said. "Cole seems pleased with how the discussions are going." "Good." A pause. "You've been to a few of the smaller pack events this week." "Land use data review," she said. "For my research." "Of course." Another pause. "Alpha Doran is said to be a very thoughtful man." Lena closed her eyes briefly. "He's competent. I heard he spent 2 hours on Thursday in the back garden with one of our research specialists, going over territorial data. There's a lot of data to go over." "Indeed." Her father's voice was warm, neutral, impossible to argue with. "I'm glad the research is getting the attention it deserves. You've worked hard on it." "I have," she said. "Well," he paused one more time. "Good night, my love." "Good night, Dad." She hung up and sat looking at the phone for a moment. The thing about her father was that he never pushed. He had learned, after the one argument when she was 20, that pushing Lena toward anything was the fastest possible way to ensure she moved in the opposite direction. So instead, he made observations. He left information in the air around her. He created the conditions for her own conclusions and then stepped back and waited. She knew exactly what he was doing, and it still worked on her every time. She was not going to think about what it was working toward. She was going to be a scientist and a reasonable person, and she was going to handle this situation with appropriate distance and good judgment, and she was absolutely not going to spend another evening writing in a notebook until 2 a.m. She was in bed by 11. She lay awake until 1. The week after that, something changed in the quality of the Thursday meetings. It was subtle, the kind of change that you cannot identify by pointing to a specific moment, only by noticing, at some point in the middle of it, that you are somewhere different than you started. The research conversations began to end before the 2 hours were up. Not because they ran out of data. She had more data. There was always more data. But because something would happen. A question would move sideways. An answer would carry an extra dimension. They would sit in the back garden with their cooling coffee and find that 20 minutes had passed during which neither of them had said anything about the research at all. They talked about the Northern Territories. She had never been north of the Central Range, and he described it in the specific, fond way of someone who understood their home, rather than simply loving it. The particular quality of winter there, which he described as honest rather than beautiful. The way the pack culture had developed differently from the Central packs, more self-sufficient, less given to ceremony. She asked about the treaty system, and he explained its history going back 5 generations, and she realized that what had seemed to her like a complex bureaucratic arrangement was actually something more interesting. A living negotiation, continually adjusted, because the packs that had built it understood that nothing stays the same, and a treaty that cannot change is a treaty that will eventually break. Cole's approach to the review process is different from the last 3, Cale said. He's more willing to reframe things from the ground up. Cole grew up on the border, Lena said. The edge. He knows what happens when the territory lines stop reflecting the actual land. Cale looked at her. You've thought about this. I've lived here my whole life, she said. You watch long enough, you see the seams. He was quiet for a moment. What would you change if you were structuring the review? She had not been asked this question. She had not been asked, in all the time she had been submitting reports and attending meetings and doing the work of knowing her territory, what she would change. She felt the question land somewhere precise and important. She took a breath. She told him. She talked for 20 minutes. She told him about the water-sharing provisions that had not been updated since the drought 3 decades ago. She told him about the Eastern Corridor where 3 pact territories met, and the agreement had been made by people who did not understand the local migration patterns. She told him about the research queue and what it meant when data sat idle while decisions moved forward without it. She told him about the young women who would inherit this territory, and what kind of land they would be working with if the current agreements held without revision. He listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not respond with reassurance or dismissal. When she was done, he sat forward and said, "The Eastern Corridor. Do you have documentation on the migration patterns?" "I have 6 years of data," she said. "Can you pull the core of it into a summary by Monday?" She looked at him. "Why Monday?" "Because the Eastern Corridor comes up in the review session on Tuesday, and I would like to walk in with better information than I currently have." She thought about the 6 years of data in her research files. She thought about the Tuesday session. She thought about the young women who would inherit the territory. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." He nodded. Then he picked up his coffee, looked at it, found it cold, set it down. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. Her hands went still on her notebook. "I've been asking you to stay involved in this review process because the information is useful," he said. "That's true. But it's not the only reason." The garden was very quiet. Somewhere in the main building behind them, someone was moving through a corridor, footsteps faint and distant. The light in the garden was the particular gold of late Thursday afternoon. She said nothing. She was waiting for what came next. "I'm not going to make a statement about it," he said. "I just wanted to be honest that I'm aware of the difference between the two things." She looked at the table. She looked at her notebook. She looked at him. "Thank you for being direct," she said. "I think you prefer it." "I do." He stood. He picked up his folder. She stood as well, and she was aware of every inch between them. And she was aware of the garden and the light and the fact that the season was still running all around them, like a current under a river, and neither of them had mentioned it. She did not mention it now either. She walked back into the building and he walked beside her, and they parted at the corridor junction, and she went left and he went right, and she made it all the way to the parking area before she stopped and stood with her eyes closed for a moment in the late afternoon air. The bond had not triggered. She was still sure of that. She had checked, the way you check a room for something you have misplaced, carefully and repeatedly. No bond, no trigger. Just a man who had told her he was aware of the difference between professional interest and the other kind, and had chosen to be honest about it, and had then done her the enormous courtesy of not requiring a response. She drove home. She called Clara before she reached her driveway. "I need to talk," she said. "I'm already making tea," Clara said. Clara made tea, and Lena sat at Clara's kitchen table and told her everything, in order, without glossing over any of it. Clara listened with both hands around her mug and her expression carefully neutral, which was a significant act of self-control for someone as expressive as Clara. She did not interrupt. She did not make the flame emoji face. She waited until Lena had finished. Then she said, "You like him. I know. You more than like him. I know. And you're terrified." Lena looked at her tea. "I'm not terrified. I'm cautious. There's a difference." Clara set her mug down. "There is a difference. But I need you to tell me which one this is, because I've known you for 11 years and I cannot always tell anymore." That was an honest thing to say. Lena appreciated honest things even when they were uncomfortable. She thought about the question seriously, the way she thought about research questions, which meant sitting with it for a moment before answering. "Both," she said. "I think it's both." Clara nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "That's new? What is?" "You not knowing?" Clara tilted her head. "Normally when something makes you uncomfortable, you have a plan by the time you're talking to me about it. You don't normally come to me in the middle of the problem. You come to me after you've solved it and you need someone to tell you the solution was reasonable." Lena was quiet. "You haven't solved this one," Clara said. "No," Lena said. "I haven't." Clara reached across the table and put her hand over Lena's briefly, then sat back. "You're allowed to want things," she said. "I know that sounds simple. I know you know it, technically. But I've watched you for 11 years making decisions based on what you don't want, and I think you've gotten so good at the list of no things that you've forgotten how to make a list of yes things." Lena stared at the table. The tea was growing cold. "I'm going to head home," she said. "Of course." Clara stood with her. Lena. Yes. The bond thing. The whole reason you built the wall. Lena looked at her. He hasn't triggered it, Clara said. You know what that means, don't you? She did know. She had known for a week and had been holding the knowledge at arm's length. If the bond had not triggered with him, after 5 Thursday afternoons in a garden, after hours of close proximity, after the careful honesty of that last conversation, then it was not going to trigger. The bond worked that way. It was immediate, or it was nothing. Whatever this was between them, it was not a bond. It was a choice. Every single part of it was a choice. She drove home very carefully, paying attention to every stop sign and turn, the way you pay attention to mechanical things when you are thinking about something that has no mechanics and no system and no predictable model. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. Monday came and she worked on the Eastern Corridor summary from early morning until late afternoon, which was a significant effort. 6 years of migration data needed to be compressed into something that could be read in 40 minutes and understood by someone who would be walking into a treaty session with it the next day. She was good at this kind of work. She understood how to find the argument inside a dataset, how to strip away the noise and present what was actually there. She finished the summary at 5 in the afternoon, and read through it once and then again, and decided it was the best work she had done in a year. She emailed it to him. He replied within 30 minutes. 2 sentences. The summary was exactly what the session needed. He would let her know how Tuesday went. She saved the email without responding. Tuesday she spent in the library, not working on anything in particular, mostly reading around the edges of her research and trying not to watch the clock. She stayed until closing time. She drove home. She ate dinner with her father, who had clearly made something elaborate on purpose to fill the evening with activity, and she appreciated the effort so much that she helped clean up without being asked, which she did not always do, and her father did not comment on it. His phone buzzed while they were finishing the dishes. He looked at the screen and then looked at her. Cole, he said, PAC council meeting tomorrow, evening. What's the agenda? He didn't say, just that it's mandatory for all members above a certain standing. He set the phone down. That includes you. She dried her hands on the dish towel. Okay, she said. I'll be there. The text from Cale came at 8 that evening, brief as always. The session went well. Your Eastern Corridor work changed 3 positions that had been fixed for 2 cycles. Thank you. She read it standing in her bedroom doorway and felt a warmth in her chest that she recognized and did not push away. Not tonight. She was too tired tonight to push it away. She typed back, glad it was useful. He replied, it was more than useful. She looked at her phone for a moment. Then she put it face down on her desk and went to brush her teeth and told herself to get some sleep before the PAC council meeting tomorrow, where she would sit in a room with 100 PAC members and their alpha, and whatever agenda he had not shared in advance. And she was fairly sure she would be fine. She was fairly sure. The PAC council meeting was held in the main hall, and the first thing Lena noticed when she arrived was that almost every seat was taken. That was unusual. Mandatory PAC meetings happened periodically. Seasonal reviews, territory updates, formal announcements, but they rarely drew this kind of attendance. People were standing along the back walls. There was an energy in the room that sat between excitement and apprehension, the kind of energy that builds when something is about to happen but has not yet been named. She found Clara near the middle of the room and slid into the seat beside her. Do you know what this is? She said quietly. No, Clara said. But Portia said she heard Cole's council had an emergency session this morning. About what? No one knows. Alpha Cole came in at 7 sharp and the room went still without being asked to. He was a man in his mid-40s with a solid build and the kind of presence that packed halls went quiet for, not because of fear but because of a quality of authority that was clean rather than heavy. He was not given to drama. When he looked out at the assembled pack with a deliberate pause before he spoke, it meant the thing he was about to say required that pause. I'll be straightforward, he began. Over the past 2 weeks, our guest delegation has been reviewing the treaty, and specifically the territorial provisions around Central PAC land use. During this process, a piece of research that had been in our administrative queue was brought forward. It changed some of the projected data significantly. He looked out at the room. As a result of that data, the delegation has formally requested that the treaty review be expanded to include Eastern Corridor provisions. This is a significant request. It would extend the review period by an additional 2 to 3 weeks, and would require additional participation from PAC members involved in land management and research. A murmur moved through the room. Not opposition, something more complex, surprise, calculation. Lena felt Clara look at her sideways. She kept her eyes on Cole. The other matter, he said, Relates to the claiming season. He paused. The delegation head has made an unusual request. He has asked that for the remainder of his stay in Crestwood, the normal claiming season social protocols be suspended for himself and his people, and that any bond discoveries during the extended period be handled through private consultation rather than public ceremony. The murmur increased in volume. Cole held up a hand. He has presented this as a matter of respect for the host pack's members. His view is that bond discoveries during a political visit create complications for both parties. He wants the review to be clean. A pause. The council has agreed to the request. Lena sat very still. She could feel the shape of what was happening around her, the room processing it, the whispers starting, people doing arithmetic on who this request was really for. She stared at the front of the room and kept her face entirely neutral. The treaty review will continue as extended, Cole finished. Any questions through the proper channels. Meeting adjourned. The room began to fill with conversation immediately. Clara turned to her, and Lena turned to Clara. They looked at each other. The bond protocols suspended, Clara said carefully, for the duration of his stay. Yes, Lena said, because of complications for both parties. That's what Cole said. Clara looked at her with an expression that contained, in equal parts, understanding and something that was almost awe. Lena. Don't, Lena said. I was just going to say, please don't. Clara closed her mouth. Then she opened it again. He cleared the field, she said, without asking you, without telling you in advance. He removed the thing that was pressuring you and asked for nothing in return. Lena stood up. Her legs were steady. Everything was steady. She was an extremely steady person. I'm going to get some air, she said. Of course, Clara said. Absolutely. Air. She walked out of the main hall and around the side of the building and stood in the dark with her back against the cool stone wall and looked up at the sky. The stars in Crestwood were extraordinary on clear nights because the territory was far from city lights. They were extraordinary tonight. She looked at them for a long time. She thought about a man who had read her research when no one else had, who had used it to change treaty positions, who had now gone to the Pack Alpha and asked that the one thing that had been hovering over the whole season like a pressure system, the claiming protocols, the bond rules, the formal architecture of what claiming season meant, be set aside, not because he wanted to claim her, because he wanted the decision about whether to be near him at all to be hers. She stood there in the dark until her heartbeat slowed to something manageable. Then she walked to her car and drove home and sat at her desk and opened a new page in her notebook. She wrote at the top, "What I want." Then she sat for a long time with the pen in her hand. It had been so long since she had made that list. It felt like the most dangerous thing she had done all season. She started writing. The list was not long. She had expected it to be long. She had spent years accumulating things she did not want, and she had assumed the counter list would be proportionally complex. Instead, it was 5 items, and when she looked at them, they were all simple. They were the kind of simple that things become when you strip away all the reasons why you are afraid of them. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. This time she slept. The next morning she was in the library by 9, earlier than her usual arrival, and she was working on the expanded summary documentation that Cole had asked all research-adjacent PAC members to prepare for the extended review. There was a substantial amount to compile. Her research alone had 3 components that fed directly into the Eastern Corridor provisions, and she settled into the work with the focus that came from knowing what it was for. She had been there for an hour when the door opened. She did not look up. Footsteps. The particular quality of movement she had learned without trying. The sound of a chair. "Good morning," Cale said. "Good morning," she said, not looking up from her notes. A brief silence. Then, "I should have told you in advance about the request I made to Cole." She looked up now. He was sitting across the table from her, folder in front of him, watching her with the full attention she had grown accustomed to, and had not yet found a way to be used to. He did not look apologetic exactly. He looked like a person who had decided honesty was owed and was delivering it. "You should have," she said. "Yes. It wasn't yours to decide. The request to Cole was mine, to make or not make," he said. "It was a request, not a decision. Cole could have said no. The protocol change affected everyone in the pack, not just you. I didn't think it required your advance approval." She looked at him. This was the thing about him that she found most disconcerting and most compelling in equal measure. He did not manage her. He did not soften his positions to make her comfortable. He explained his reasoning and held it and let her disagree. "Why did you do it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I watched you spend the first 2 weeks of the season building walls around yourself. And I watched them cost you something. And I thought, if the claiming architecture itself is part of what's building the walls, then removing the architecture is the honest thing to do. He looked at the table briefly, then back at her. You deserve to make decisions in open air, not inside a pressure system. She looked at him for a long time. You could have asked me, she said. Yes, he said. But then the removal of the pressure would have become another form of pressure. If I asked you, you'd have to decide in the presence of the asking. I didn't want that. She picked up her pen. She turned it over in her fingers. You think about things very carefully, she said. I try to. It's occasionally alarming. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. She had started to understand that this particular expression meant something was landing correctly. I know, he said. I've been told. She set the pen down. Thank you, she said, for the intent of it, even if the execution needed consultation. He nodded once. Nodded for future reference. The words landed in the room and neither of them reacted to them visibly, but they were both aware of the weight of them. Future reference, the acknowledgement, built into a phrase, that there was a future in which reference could be made. It was small. It was enormous. She pulled her research binder toward her. I've started the expanded documentation for the review. Do you want to go through the water sharing provisions first or the land access classifications? He opened his folder. Water sharing, he said. Land access has a dependency on it. It does, she said. I thought so too. They worked. The days that followed had a different quality than the days before the PAC meeting. Something had shifted in the air between them, not dramatically, not in any way that changed the rhythm of what they were doing, but the shift was there. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a change in season, not a single moment but an accumulation of small things. The way he handed her a page from his folder, the way she stopped angling herself at a professional distance and simply sat. The silences, which had previously felt like spaces she needed to fill with competence, that now felt like something else entirely. She told none of this to Clara directly. Clara could read her well enough that telling was unnecessary. You're different, Clara said one evening, coming to meet her for dinner. In what way? Like you've stopped holding your breath. Lena thought about this. Maybe, she said. Is that good? She picked up her menu and looked at it. It's honest, she said. I think honest is good. Clara smiled behind her menu. She said nothing else about it. It was the following Thursday, in the back garden, in the middle of a conversation about land access provisions that had gradually become a conversation about the nature of territorial belonging, when he said something that stopped her mid-sentence. She had been talking about the PAC's relationship to the Eastern Corridor, how the families who had lived along its edges for generations had a different relationship to the land than the formal treaty provisions recognized, how belonging was a lived thing, accumulated over years, and the documents tried to capture it and always fell slightly short. Like a bond, he said. She stopped. She looked at him. He looked back, and he was very still in the way he got when he was about to say something that mattered. A bond is documented, he said. It gets a ceremony, but the thing it documents was already there before the ceremony. The ceremony just names it. She was quiet for a long moment. You're not talking about territorial provisions, she said. No, he said. I'm not. Outside the garden wall, Crestwood was doing its Thursday things, the market square winding down from its midweek activity, the library closing, the school letting its youngest students out. The world was proceeding. The season was still running. The treaty was still being reviewed. All of it was happening exactly as it was supposed to happen. Inside the garden, she was sitting across a small table from a man who had told her, without naming her, that whatever was between them had been there before any official naming of it. She breathed in slowly. She breathed out. I went to Mara, she said, her sister's name, out loud, the first time she had said it in this context. He waited. After she bonded, Lena continued. 2 years after, I visited her, and I watched her for an afternoon, and I drove home, knowing that something in her had changed. Not broken, just arranged differently around him, and I told myself it was the bond that had done it, that it was what bonds did. She looked at the table. I don't know if that's true anymore, she said. I think it might have been specific to them. I think I took one story and made it a rule. He did not say, I told you so. He did not say, you were wrong. He said, it's a reasonable thing to do with a story that scared you. She looked up. He was just watching her, patient and present and not requiring anything. I'm not going to make any declarations today, she said. I know, he said. I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking differently about some things. I know that too, he said. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. They went back to the land access provisions, and she focused on the work, and he focused on the work, and the afternoon moved toward evening at its usual pace, and when she left the garden she walked to her car, and she thought that she had not once, the entire afternoon, thought about the rules she had made at the start of the season. Not because she had forgotten them, because they were beginning to seem like they had been made by a slightly different person, a person she was in the process of outgrowing. She was not sure what to do with that yet. But she was starting to think about it, and starting to think about something was always, in her experience, the beginning of the only direction that mattered. Mara arrived on a Saturday. Lena did not know she was coming. She was in the back garden of her father's house, weeding the vegetable bed that had gotten out of control over the past several weeks while she had been occupied with everything else, when she heard the front gate and looked up and saw her sister walking down the path. Mara was 30 years old and looked like their mother in the ways that Lena did not. The same tilt of the head, the same width at the cheekbones, the same hands. She was wearing a yellow cardigan that should have clashed with everything but managed to look exactly right, because Mara had always had an instinct for color that Lena had never quite understood and deeply admired. They hugged without words. That was how they had always been. Silence and then closeness, closeness and then talk, the sequence never varying. "Dad called you," Lena said. "He suggested it might be a good time for a visit," Mara said, which was confirmation without admission. They went inside, and Mara sat at the kitchen table while Lena washed her hands and put the kettle on, and the kitchen did what kitchens do in families. It held the both of them in the particular comfort of a room that had always contained them and always would. "How is Daniel?" Lena asked. "He's good," Mara said. "He sends his love." "Is he?" She stopped. "Is he what?" She had never asked the question directly. She had circled it for 4 years, seeing it from every angle, pressing on the edges of it in careful language, but she had never asked it directly, because she had not wanted to be the one who put words to something that might not have been there. "Are you happy?" she asked. Mara looked at her with a look that was several layers deep. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes yes is the whole answer. Not always. No, not always." Mara folded her hands on the table. "But is always happy the standard? Because I've never met anyone who met it." Lena poured the tea. "You were different," she said, "before." "Everyone is different before." Mara's voice was gentle. "You're different before anything that changes you. That's not the bond specifically. That's life." Lena sat down. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at her sister. "When I came to visit you 2 summers ago, you asked Daniel before you made the tea." Mara blinked. Then she was quiet for a moment, and her quiet had a texture to it, like she was taking something seriously rather than dismissing it. "I remember," she said. "You waited for him." "I did." Mara was still looking at her steadily. "You know what you didn't see? You came for an afternoon. You didn't see him making space for me in every meeting where the other men talked past me. You didn't see him driving 3 hours in the middle of the night, because I called and said I needed to come home. You didn't see him reading my manuscripts even though he hates reading, because I needed someone to tell me whether the argument worked." She paused. "I asked before making the tea because we share a kitchen and he had a headache, and the sound of the kettle bothers him when his head hurts. That is the whole story." Lena was very still. "I am not saying bonds are always good," Mara said. "I know women whose bonding went wrong. I know women who are smaller inside it, and men who use it as weight. That's real. Your concern about it is not imaginary." A pause. "But you took the worst version of something and decided it was the only version, and I've been watching you do that for 4 years, and I didn't say anything because you're my little sister, and I know how you receive interference, badly and for a long time. But Dad told me about the northern man." Lena looked at the table. "He said you're different," Mara said. "He said you've started looking up from your work. That's a low standard." "For you, Lena, looking up from your work is a significant development." She could not argue with that. She drank her tea. "I'm not bonded to him," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know. Dad mentioned that too." "Then why?" "Because," Mara said, with the patience of someone who had thought about this longer than the conversation had been running. "The problem was never about the bond. The bond was the thing you fixed your fear to. But the fear is older than that." She set down her cup. "You're afraid of needing someone. You're afraid of what happens to a person who needs someone and the someone changes or leaves or fails. You watched that happen to Mum. You watched Dad afterwards, and you decided, at some age I cannot precisely identify, that the safest thing in the world was to need nothing and no one." The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the garden was doing its Saturday thing. Sun on the vegetable bed, a robin on the fence post. The particular peace of late morning in a small home in a territory you have always known. Lena's eyes were dry. She was not going to cry in the kitchen on a Saturday while her sister was right about something. She was an extremely disciplined person. She was almost certain she was going to cry. "He's very careful," she said, instead of crying. "He thinks about things before he does them. He removed the claiming protocols without telling me in advance, and I was furious about the not telling me. But the reason he did it was. She stopped. "It was for you," Mara said. "It was for me," Lena said. Mara nodded slowly. "Tell me about him," she said. And Lena did. She told Mara about the library and the coffee and the garden and the research and the Eastern Corridor session and the 5 Thursdays and the list she had made in her notebook. She told her about the night after the PAC meeting when she had sat at her desk and written, "What I want," at the top of a page, and then actually written things down. She told her about the way he listened, about the particular quality of his stillness, about the fact that he had told her, once, that he was not interested in a woman who had been made smaller, and that she had not slept for several hours after that because of what it felt like to be seen that clearly. Mara listened to all of it without interrupting. When Lena finished, she sat quietly for a moment. "So," she said. "So," Lena said. "You're still scared. I'm still scared. But it's different now." "It's different," Lena said. "Before it was a wall, a decision I had made before the thing even arrived. Now it's more like standing at a door I haven't opened yet. It's still possible to not open it. I could not open it, and everything would be okay. But I think I want to open it." Mara looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over Lena's, and this time it was Mara's turn to be quiet, in the way that mothers and sisters and the people who have known you longest are quiet when they are simply with you. "Then open it," she said. Mara stayed for the weekend. Their father made a large dinner on Saturday night, and they sat around the table the way they had not sat around it in years, and it was noisy and warm and the kind of evening that makes you aware of what time takes and what it leaves. Lena washed up while Mara dried, and they talked about nothing important for an hour, and it felt like being 12 and 16 again in the best possible way. Sunday morning, before Mara left, she found Lena in the garden. "One more thing," she said. "Go ahead." "The thing you said about Mum." Mara looked at the vegetable bed, watching Dad after. "You were 15. I know how old I was. You were 15, and you watched someone you loved be devastated, and you made a decision about love from that, which is, I understand it. But Lena," she turned to look at her, "Dad is not less for loving her. He's not broken because he lost her. He's just a person who misses someone very much." A pause. "That's not a warning about love. That's just what love looks like sometimes." Lena stood in the garden in the morning sun. "I know," she said. "I think you're starting to know it," Mara said. "There's a difference." She hugged Lena hard. She got in her car and drove west. Lena stood at the gate and watched the car disappear, and then stood there a while longer, not ready to go back inside. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cale. "Treaty technical session tomorrow morning. Cole has invited you to sit in. Your water sharing analysis is on the agenda." She read it twice. She typed back, "I'll be there." A moment passed. Then, good. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back to the vegetable bed and pulled weeds for another hour, methodically and without hurrying, thinking about doors. By the time she went inside for lunch, she knew which way they opened. Monday's technical session lasted 4 hours. Lena sat at the end of the council table with a stack of documentation and a pen that she used continuously, making notes in the margins of documents and passing specific pages across the table when they became relevant. She had never been in a formal treaty session before. Cole had invited her in a professional capacity, and she was professional throughout, careful, precise, speaking only when her data was directly relevant, letting the analysis carry the argument. But she was aware of him. She was aware of every moment in which his voice entered the room. He spoke differently in a formal session than he did in the garden, more measured, more contained, but the same quality of precision underneath. He built arguments the way she built research structures, from the ground up, with each layer resting on the one below it. Twice he referenced her work without pointing to her. The third time he said, "As the Crestwood research indicated," and the council member across the table looked at the documentation, looked at Lena, and nodded with the expression of someone revising their understanding of a situation. She kept her face neutral. She wrote a note in a margin. The session broke for lunch. People dispersed. Lena was collecting her papers when she became aware that the room had mostly emptied. Cole was speaking quietly with 2 of his council members near the door. She was at the far end of the table. Cale walked the length of it and stopped a few feet from her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Your preparation made a significant difference." "The data made the difference," she said. "I just organized it." "You organized it so it could be understood and used in time to matter." He paused. "That's not nothing." She looked at him. He was close enough that she was aware of the space between them as something with dimensions. Not threatening, just present. "There are 2 sessions left," he said, "Thursday and Friday." "I know." "After Friday, the formal review ends." She looked at her papers. "And the delegation leaves," she said. "The delegation leaves." He paused, and she understood that the pause was deliberate, and that he was giving her time to hold the statement before adding to it. "I haven't decided my own timeline." She looked up. He was watching her steadily, not pressing, not performing the look, just honest. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She picked up her papers. She walked to the door and then stopped, because this was apparently becoming something she did when leaving rooms that contained him. She turned. "Thursday," she said. "Same time?" "Same time," he said. She went out into the corridor. She realized with considerable startlement, not afraid at all. She called Clara from the parking area. "He said he hasn't decided his own timeline," she said when Clara picked up. Clara was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Say that again." "He said the delegation leaves Friday. He said he hasn't decided his own timeline." "Lena?" "I know. That means he's considering staying. I know what it means. Because of you. Clara. I know what it means," Lena said more firmly. "I'm standing in a parking area having already worked out what it means. I don't need you to work it out for me." "Okay," Clara said, in the voice of someone exercising enormous restraint. "What do you need from me right now?" Lena looked at the community hall building. Through one of the upper windows she could see the light of the room they had just left. "I need to not make this into a thing I overthink," she said. "I need to just let it be what it is, and see what Thursday is, and stop calculating. That might be the most difficult thing you have ever attempted." "I know. You calculate everything." "I know, Clara. You made a spreadsheet once to decide which coffee shop to use. The data supported the East Side shop. It turned out to be correct. It took you 4 days. The point," Lena said, "is that I am aware of my tendency, and I am choosing, deliberately, to not apply it to this situation." Clara was quiet again. "That's growth," she said finally, and she said it with real warmth. "Go away," Lena said, without meanness. "Call me Thursday night." "Yes." Wednesday. She did not work on the research. She cooked something elaborate that took 3 hours and ate half of it and gave the rest to her father. She went for a long walk on the North Trail in the late afternoon and came back with muddy boots and clearer thoughts. She sat in the garden while the light went down and thought about the specific quality of not being afraid. It was unfamiliar territory. She was used to the competence of managing fear, the lists, the rules, the walls, the plans. She was very good at all of those things. What she was not good at, and what she had slowly, over the past 3 weeks, been learning to do, was simply being in a feeling without immediately organizing it. She sat in the garden until the stars came out. Then she went inside and packed her research binder for Thursday and went to bed at a reasonable hour. She slept well. Thursday was different from every Thursday before it. She knew it when she walked into the garden and found him already there, which had not happened before. She had always been first. He had brought the coffee. Both cups, the way she usually brought them. She sat down and looked at the cups and then at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Last one before the formal session's end," she said. "Yes." She picked up her coffee. "Are we doing the remaining documentation?" He was quiet. "We could," he said. She looked at him. "Or we could not," he said. He was not being evasive. He was, as always, being exact. The documentation could wait. There were other things that had been accumulating, carefully, and without rush, across every Thursday in this garden. She set the coffee down. She folded her hands on the table. "Okay," she said, "then let's not." The garden was quiet in the particular way of late morning, the birds having settled from their early activity, and the afternoon birds not yet started. In the distance somewhere, the packground was doing its usual things. It was a normal Thursday in Crestwood, and everything was ordinary, and everything was the furthest thing from ordinary. "I thought," he said, "that at the end of all this, the review, the treaty, the season, you might want to know something clearly, not implied, not managed. Clearly." "Yes," she said. He looked at her directly, the way he had from the first moment in the library. I want to know you. Not in the context of the treaty. Not as a research contributor. As a person. A pause. I'm aware that this is complicated. I'm aware that you came into this season with strong reasons to want nothing like this. I am not asking you to disregard those reasons. What are you asking? She said. I'm asking whether, after Friday, you would be willing to find out what this is in conditions that aren't borrowed time. She breathed. The garden. The coffee. The particular light that this place had on Thursday mornings. She had stopped thinking of Thursdays as days she was spending. She had started thinking of them as something she wanted more of. You'd stay in Crestwood, she said. For a while, if there's reason to. That's a significant interruption to your responsibilities. I have good people in the north, he said. A short extension is manageable. A short extension for what? She asked. Because she needed it said. She needed the words to be in the air rather than in the implication. He looked at her steadily. To see if what we've been building in this garden is something we want to build somewhere else. She looked at her hands on the table. She looked at him. She thought about the list in her notebook. The 5 simple things. She thought about Mara in the kitchen saying the door could open. She thought about her father at the gate with his quiet hope and his lack of pressure. She thought about 15-year-old Lena watching her mother's absence reshape her father and making a decision from grief that she had carried for 7 years, as though it were wisdom. Yes, she said. He was still. Yes? Yes, she said. Stay. Find out. Something shifted in his face that was the most honest expression she had ever seen on a person. Not performance, not relief exactly, more like the settling of something that had been held carefully for a long time, like a hand finally setting down something heavy. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They sat in the garden for another 2 hours and they talked, not about land provisions or migration data or treaty clauses, but about all the other things. The North and the South and the science and the season, and the people they were when no one was constructing anything around them. The coffee went cold again, and she drank it anyway, and he did too. And the morning became afternoon while they were not paying attention to the time. When she finally stood to leave, and he stood with her, and they walked side by side through the corridor back to the main entrance, she stopped at the door. I should tell you something, she said. He waited. I built very strong arguments for why this should not happen, she said. Very specific, logical, well-evidenced arguments. I know, he said. They were not wrong arguments. No, he said, they were not. They were just not the whole picture. He looked at her. That's true of most arguments. She nodded. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She reached out and put her hand briefly against his arm, not holding, just contact, one moment of it, and then withdrew her hand and said goodbye and walked out into the Thursday afternoon. Behind her, she heard him not say anything. He was very good at not saying the things that didn't need to be said. It was one of the things she was starting to build an entire list around. The last 2 sessions of the formal treaty review passed with the kind of focused efficiency that comes when the difficult work has already been done, and the remaining steps are just the completion of it. Thursday and Friday moved with clean momentum. The language was agreed on, the new provisions inserted, the Eastern Corridor clauses drafted and reviewed and initialed. Alpha Cole shook hands with Kale at the end of Friday's session, with an expression of genuine satisfaction, and the room around them relaxed in the way rooms relax when something hard has been completed well. Lena was present at both sessions in her professional capacity, and she performed that capacity cleanly. She passed documents when they were needed. She clarified data when asked. She sat at her end of the table with her notes and her pen, and she did not look at him more than the work required. And she did not need to, because she had already said yes, and yes was a thing she had said, and would keep saying. Afterwards, on Friday evening, the pack held a small closing dinner for the delegation, a proper send-off, warm and communal, the kind of meal that packs made when they wanted the leaving to feel like an ending rather than an abandonment. Lena attended this time without hesitation. She sat at a table with Owen and Priya and 2 women from the northern delegation, and she talked and listened and ate the good food and felt the warmth of the room around her like something she was allowing rather than managing. He found her at the end, in the small courtyard attached to the back of the hall, where she had stepped out for air. The evening was clear, the same extraordinary stars she had stood under after the pack council meeting, and she was looking at them when she heard him come out. The formal part is done, he said. It is, she said. The delegation leaves tomorrow morning. Yes. He came to stand beside her, not close enough to require a reaction, just beside her, and they both looked at the stars for a moment. She had noticed, over the weeks, that he did not require conversation to fill silence. He carried silence the way he carried space, with intention rather than discomfort. "I've spoken to Cole," he said, "about the extension." She looked at him sideways. "And?" He was gracious about it. A pause. "He may also have already known I was considering it." "My father may have said something," she said. He turned to look at her. Something briefly and genuinely amused crossed his face, and it was a different expression than the not-quite smiles she had been accumulating. This was closer to the real thing, and it did something to her chest that she was going to have to simply accept was now going to happen. "My father expresses hope through the back channel," she said, "always has. He seems like a good man." "He is." She paused. "You'll meet him properly, if you're staying. I'd like that." She looked back at the stars. "How long?" she asked. "I'll know better in a few days. No less than 2 weeks, possibly more. 2 weeks. The season would still be running. She would be in her territory, in her normal life, with this new and uncategorized thing threaded through it. It did not feel like a trap. It did not feel like the pressure system she had spent months building walls against. It felt like space. Actual, breathable, unchoreographed space. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood in the courtyard a while longer. At some point during the standing, she became aware that their shoulders were close enough that the next slight shift of weight would have brought them into contact, and neither of them made that shift, and not making it was its own kind of deliberateness. She went home at 10. She called Clara. She described the conversation with brevity, and watched Clara's response through the phone like a weather system approaching. "He's staying," Clara said. "For now," Lena said. "For you." "For the situation," Lena said, and Clara made a sound that meant she was choosing not to argue. She slept well again that night. Saturday was quiet, as days after significant things tend to be. She worked on her research in the morning, and went to her father's for lunch, and did not bring up Cale directly. But she let her father talk about the treaty outcome with real enthusiasm, and she participated in the conversation without deflecting, which she understood he was reading correctly. On Sunday, she got a text from a number she had not saved but immediately recognized. It said, "The delegation is gone. I'm at the East Side coffee shop. Is it still the best one in Crestwood?" She stared at it for a long moment. She typed, "It's the only one worth mentioning." A pause. Then, "Are you available?" She was in her pajamas at 10 in the morning with wet hair and no plan for the day. "Give me 40 minutes, she typed. "I'll get the coffee." She showered and dressed and drove to the east side and found him at a table near the window, 2 cups already on the table, and she sat down and picked up hers, and it was exactly right. She had not mentioned her order. He had ordered it from memory. "You remembered," she said. "I pay attention," he said. She drank her coffee. Outside the window, the market square was doing its Sunday things. Slower than the week, families rather than workers. The pace of a day that doesn't have a schedule. It was a quiet, normal morning. She was sitting across a small table from a man who had stayed in her territory past his obligations, and it felt remarkable only in how unremarkable it felt, like something that had been earned rather than arranged. "What do you want to do today?" she asked. He looked at her. It was the first time she had asked him that. They had always been in the context of work before, always in the framework of the treaty and the data and the sessions. Today there was no context. Today was just a day. "I'd like to see the North Trail," he said. "You've mentioned it several times. It's an hour round trip, on the short version," she said. 2.5 if you go to the Ridge." "The Ridge," he said. "If you have time." "I have time," she said. They drove to the trailhead in her car, which felt like something out of the ordinary life she had always described to herself as sufficient. She parked and they walked, and she told him about the trail the way she knew it, not the tourist version but the working version, the species that grew where, the section where the water table came close to the surface and changed the plant composition, the ridge where on a clear day you could see the outer edge of the Northern Territories in the distance. He walked slightly behind her on the narrow parts and beside her when the path opened up, and he asked questions about the plants and the soil and the animal signs she pointed out along the way, and they were not easy questions. They were the same kind of questions he asked in the research sessions, the kind that required real thinking to answer. She answered all of them. At the ridge, they stood and looked north. The view was wide. The sky was the particular deep blue of midday at altitude, and the wind at the ridge was clean and fast, and she felt it in her hair and on her face, and stood with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the distance. "You can see the northern ranges from here," she said, pointing. He stood beside her and looked where she pointed. "Yes," he said quietly. Those are the Doran Peaks. I grew up looking at them from the other side. She thought about that. The same mountains, seen from opposite directions for 2 different lifetimes. What's it like? She asked, seeing them from here. He was quiet for a moment. Like seeing something familiar from a new angle, he said. You recognize it, but it shows you something it couldn't show you from the other side. She looked at the mountains. I've never been north of the Central Range, she said. I know. He turned to look at her. Would you want to? She turned her head to look at him. He was close, closer than the narrow ridge required, and he was asking a straightforward question that was also entirely not a straightforward question. Yes, she said, I think I would. He nodded once. They stood there a while longer, looking at the mountains from this side, and then they walked back down the trail together, and she drove them to a place she knew that served lunch on weekends, and they ate, and the afternoon stretched around them like something that had been waiting to be used. She drove home at 5, and she sat in her driveway, and she thought, this is what I was afraid of. Not this specifically, but this feeling, the feeling of having let something in, of having opened the door and found that the air on the other side was good. She thought, it was always going to feel like this. She had just needed to be ready. The following 2 weeks moved with a different rhythm than any 2 weeks she had known in Crestwood. He was present in the territory but not attached to any formal obligation, which meant their time together was unscheduled, a word she had never particularly liked and was learning to appreciate. She would be working in the library and he would appear. She would text him when she was going to the North Trail and he would come. Her father had them to dinner on a Wednesday and cooked with the focused joy of a man who had wanted this for years and was doing a great job of not saying so. Clara met him for the first time at the small coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Lena watched the introduction with mild anxiety that she would never admit to. Clara shook his hand and looked at him with the assessment of a person who had been Lena's best friend for 11 years and was making an evaluation with full context. Lena says you ask good questions, Clara said. I try to, he said. She also said your first conversation was about the historical section of the library. It was. Clara looked at Lena. He walked into the Pack library during claiming season and asked for the history section. He was there for research, Lena said. It's still the funniest thing, Clara said, with the tone of someone who would be telling this story for many years. He looked slightly confused. Clara liked him immediately. Lena could tell by the way the shape of Clara's posture changed. She went from assessment mode to genuine ease, which took longer with some people and was almost instant with others. The 3 of them sat together for an hour and talked about nothing particular and everything adjacent to particular, and when Cale excused himself briefly to take a call, Clara leaned across the table at speed. He's real, she said. I know he's real. I mean, he's not a type or a symbol or a fear. He's just a real person. Yes, Lena said. He is. Clara sat back. Good, she said. That's all I needed. On the last day of the extension, the day he had indicated he would need to make a final decision about returning north, she woke early and felt the morning with a strange clarity. Not dread, not excitement, just clarity. She made coffee. She sat at her desk. She opened her notebook to the page that said, "What I want" at the top and read the 5 things again. They were still the same things. She was still the same person. And yet something in the arrangement had shifted, the way furniture in a room you know well can be moved, and the space makes a different sense. More sense, actually, than it made before, even though the room itself has not changed. She closed the notebook. She picked up her phone. She texted him first, which was not something she had done before. "When are you deciding?" she asked. A reply came in 3 minutes. "Deciding what?" She paused, then, "You know what?" A longer pause. "I already decided," he said. She stared at her phone. "When?" she typed. 2 weeks ago," he said, "in the garden. You said yes." She set the phone down. She picked it back up. "Then why did you say you'd decide today?" "Because I didn't want to pressure you," he said. "I wanted you to have the time." She stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she typed, "Come to the garden. Bring coffee." A minute passed. "Already on my way," he said. She was in the garden when he arrived, sitting at the small table with her hands folded and the morning doing its best work on everything around her. The light in the trees, the sound of birds, the unhurried quality of a day that had not yet acquired any obligations. He came through the side gate with 2 cups and sat across from her, and set hers on the table and looked at her. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She picked up her coffee. "Okay," she said. "We should probably talk about what comes next." "Probably," he agreed. You go north, she said. You have things there, responsibilities, a territory. Yes. And I'm here, she said. I have research in the middle of a significant phase. I have my pack. I have Thursdays in this garden. You have all of that, he said. So what does this look like? Practically. She was being practical because being practical was what she knew how to do, and also because the practical question was the honest one. She did not want a beautiful, vague thing. She had spent too long not knowing what she wanted to accept something that didn't have a shape. He wrapped both hands around his cup. Practically, he said, it looks like this. I go north. I handle what needs handling. I come back. We figure out the distance between those two things as we understand more about what they're containing. That's not a plan, she said. No, he agreed. It's a direction. She looked at him. I've always preferred plans. I know. He looked back. But plans are for situations where you know the variables. We don't know the variables yet. We only know the direction. She thought about her father in the kitchen the night her mother got sick, making dinner because dinner was what he could control. Because some things you cannot plan against, and what you do in those situations is choose a direction and move. She had watched that and concluded that love was dangerous because it made you vulnerable to the unplannable. She had not considered, at 15, that her father had chosen the direction anyway. Every day since. Not because he was not afraid, but because the direction was worth the fear. She breathed in slowly. Okay, she said. Direction. I can work with direction. He looked at her in the way that had become familiar, the full, unperformed attention that she had once found alarming, and now found the opposite of alarming. Are you sure? He asked. No, she said, but I'm choosing it anyway. Something settled in him, the same settling she had seen in the garden on the last real Thursday, the quality of something put down after a long hold. He nodded once, slowly. When do you leave? She asked. Tuesday, he said. Monday morning I'll brief Cole on the aftermath of the review. Tuesday I go north. That's 4 days. Yes. She looked at the garden. The vegetable bed still needed work. She had started on it and not finished. The trees at the far end were doing what trees did in this season, producing that specific green that was almost aggressive in its freshness. She had sat in this garden most of her life, and she had a new way of seeing it now, which was that she was seeing it alongside a new awareness of what it would look like when it was only this again. Friday, she said. He looked at her. What about Friday? Clara is having dinner at her place Friday. Small group. People I actually like. I want you to come. He was quiet for a moment. As what? He asked, not calculating, not testing. Just honest. As someone I want to have there, she said. I'm not going to name it more specifically than that right now. That's enough, he said. Good. They sat in the garden until the coffee was gone, and then sat a while longer, not filling the time with anything in particular, just being in it. This was something she had learned over the weeks. That time with him did not require constant content. It could just be time. She had not known, before, that time could feel like that with another person. It seemed like important information. Friday's dinner was small. Just Clara and her partner Owen, Priya from the research team, a woman named Nell who worked in pack administration, and who Lena had known since childhood. 6 people total, around Clara's kitchen table, with Clara's cooking and good conversation, and the particular ease of people who trust each other. Kale fit into it, not by performing ease, by being a person who was genuinely curious about other people, who asked Nell about the administrative work with the same attentiveness he had brought to Lena's research, who listened to Owen's migration study follow-up with real interest, who laughed once, fully, at something Clara said that was actually very funny. It was the first time she had heard him laugh without reservation, and it landed in her chest like a stone in still water. She watched him from across the table during a moment when he was talking to Priya, and she thought, this is the person. This specific person, in this specific kitchen, on this specific Friday. She was not afraid of that thought. She was, in fact, done being afraid of it. After dinner, when people were beginning to make their way out, Clara pulled Lena briefly into the hallway while Kale was saying goodbye to Owen. Well, Clara said. Don't, Lena said. I was just going to say. I know what you were going to say. I'm very happy for you. Lena looked at her for a moment. Then she hugged her, hard, the kind of hug that says the things that do not need to be said between people who have known each other long enough. Clara hugged her back with equal force. Go out there, Clara said. She went out there. He was at the door, coat in hand, and when he saw her he held the door for her and they walked out into the Friday night together, and the street was quiet, and the stars were doing what stars in Crestwood did on clear nights. They walked to her car. They stood beside it. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," she said. She looked up at him. He was taller than her and close, and he was looking at her with the expression she had accumulated across every Thursday and every garden morning and every data session, the expression that was full attention without demand, and she thought about the door that Mara had told her to open. She stood on her toes and she kissed him briefly on the cheek, close to the corner of his mouth, not hesitant, just brief. When she pulled back, he was still looking at her, and the expression had changed, not dramatically, but in the way that things change when something arrives that has been waited for without requiring the waiting to be acknowledged. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday," he said. "I'll be in touch before." "You better be." She got in her car. She did not look back. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and she was smiling without planning to be, and she thought about direction, and she thought about the mountains from the ridge, and she thought about a list of 5 things that had always been the truth. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment. Then she went inside, sat at her desk, and opened the notebook to the page that said, "What I want." Below the 5 things, she wrote one more. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed and slept without interruption, the full, clean sleep of a person who has made a difficult decision and found it to be the right one. Outside her window, the pines moved in a late wind, and Crestwood settled into its Friday night, and the season was still running, but it had stopped being the point, and somewhere across the territory a man she had stopped being afraid of was also preparing for Tuesday and thinking about what comes next. Direction, not a plan. Both of them moving in the same one. He left on Tuesday as planned. The morning was gray and the air had the damp chill of a season changing its mind about itself, and Lena drove to the northern edge of Crestwood where the road met the territory boundary, and stood at her car and watched the convoy move north until it was trees and then nothing. She did not feel the way she had expected to feel. She had assumed she would feel the old contraction, the tightening of something carefully arranged, the reflex that had always told her that needing was the first step toward losing. Instead, she felt something that took her a moment to identify because she had not experienced its specific texture before. It was not happiness exactly, or not only happiness. It was more like standing after a long time crouching, the particular opening of something that has been held small. She drove back through Crestwood and went to the library and worked on her research and answered 3 emails from the Biological Consortium and ate lunch at her desk and called her father in the late afternoon. "He left today," her father said. He already knew. "He left today," she agreed. A pause. "How are you feeling?" "Like myself," she said, "but different." Her father was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a very good answer." She stayed on the phone with him for an hour, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that was really just company, and she was grateful for it in the particular way you are grateful for things you have always had but are only now beginning to see clearly. He texted from the road on Tuesday evening, just, "Good day for driving. The Doran Peaks look different from this side." She typed, "Give them my regards." A minute passed, then, they said, "Come visit." She smiled at her phone. She put it face down. She was still smiling. The weeks that followed were not what she had expected, because she had not known what to expect, which turned out to be the correct approach. He called on Thursday evenings, which happened without either of them arranging it. The first Thursday after he left, she was sitting at her desk at 7, and her phone rang, and his name was on the screen, and she answered it, and they talked for 2 hours. And the Thursday after that it happened again, and by the third Thursday it was simply what Thursdays were. He was good on the phone. She had assumed he would be less himself without the physical presence, without the particular quality of stillness that she had associated with him from the beginning. But it turned out that his voice carried the same quality, low, unhurried, with full attention. She would talk about her research and he would ask questions. He would talk about the Northern Review sessions and she would ask questions. At some point, the conversation always left the professional and became the other thing, the thing that had no category, except that it was the reason for the calling. He was dealing with a complicated territorial boundary dispute in the north, 2 subpacks whose land claims had overlapped for a generation, and who had been managing the overlap through informal agreement that was beginning to fray. He talked about it the way he talked about all complex problems, methodically, with the frustration contained rather than performed. The informal agreements worked because the 2 senior wolves trusted each other, he said. When one of them retired, the trust didn't transfer. "You can't document trust," Lena said. "You can document the agreements that trust produced. and then manage the relationship between documents rather than people. Does that work? Not perfectly, he said, but it works. It gives both sides something external to point to rather than requiring them to generate the trust themselves. That sounds like most of treaty law, she said. It is most of treaty law, he said. It's also most of how people manage relationships they can't fully resolve. She thought about that. Is that depressing or realistic? Both, he said. And occasionally useful. She turned her pen over in her fingers. The Eastern Corridor, she said. The updated clauses. I'd like to check in on how they're being implemented. I was going to suggest the same thing, he said. The new water sharing provisions have 3 moving parts that need monitoring. Would you be willing to submit a follow-up assessment at the 6-week mark? I was already planning it, she said. A pause. Then, with the not-quite smile she could now hear in his voice, I know you were. Then why ask? Because asking is correct, he said. She shook her head, even though he could not see it. They talked for another hour. Clara noticed the Thursdays after the second one. You're different on Thursdays, she said on a Friday morning when they met for coffee. I work late on Thursdays, Lena said. You work late every day. Thursdays you're different after. Lena drank her coffee. We talk on Thursday evenings. Clara looked at her over her cup. You and Cale. Yes. Every Thursday? So far. Clara nodded slowly. For how long do you talk? It varies. Last Thursday was 2.5 hours. Clara set her cup down very gently. Lena. I know. 2.5 hours. We have a lot to discuss. There are research follow-ups. The boundary dispute in the north has components that… Lena. She stopped talking. You talk for 2.5 hours, Clara said, every Thursday, and you start planning for it during the week. Don't argue with me about the planning. I watched you rearrange your Wednesday afternoon to make sure you finished your work in time. She had done that. She was not going to acknowledge it, which was itself an acknowledgement. You are in something, Clara said. I just want you to be honest with yourself about what it is. I'm being honest with myself, she said. I'm just doing it at my own pace. Clara looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded. Once, decisively. Fair, she said. Just don't do it so slowly that you miss it. She drove home from that conversation thinking about what Clara had said. Not the part about Thursdays, she was already aware of Thursdays. The last part. Don't do it so slowly that you miss it. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook, not the page with the list. A new page. She wrote 2 things at the top. Then she sat back and looked at them. She was not going to overthink them. She was going to let them be facts, and work forward from facts. Fact 1, she was in something. Fact 2, she did not want to be careful about it anymore. 4 weeks after he left Crestwood, on a Thursday evening after their call, he said, I'm coming back in 2 weeks. She had known it was coming. He had mentioned the possibility 2 weeks earlier, in the context of the follow-up assessment. She had been waiting for it the way you wait for weather you can see building on the horizon. For the assessment? She asked. Partly, he said. And the other part? To see you, he said. Simply. She looked at the ceiling. She was at her desk, as always, with her notebook open and her lamp on, the night dark outside. This was where she was every Thursday evening now. She had stopped thinking of it as strange. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he said. She closed her notebook. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. And she could hear, in the word, the same thing she felt. The distance between now and 2 weeks compressed to something manageable by the fact of its being named. 2 weeks was simultaneously a long time and no time at all. She submitted the 6-week follow-up assessment to Cole's office and received a formal acknowledgement and an informal note from Cole himself saying the updated provisions were performing well in the field, which was about as close to enthusiasm as administrative correspondence got. She finished the second section of her research paper. She revised the first section. She sent the draft to the consortium and got back 3 pages of comments that were rigorous and encouraging in equal measure, which was the kind of feedback that required a day of processing before becoming useful. She went to dinner with her father twice. She walked the North Trail 4 times. She sat in the back garden on mornings when the weather was good and thought about the small table that was still there, and the chairs, and what it would look like in a week, and then in less than a week, and then in 3 days. On the day he arrived, she did not go to the road to wait. She stayed in her house and worked until 2 in the afternoon, when she heard the front gate and looked up from her desk. She did not need to look out the window. She closed her notebook and she walked to the door. He was on the front path when she opened it, travel-worn and real. and the first second of seeing him after weeks of only his voice was the particular relief of confirmation. Yes, this person is as you remembered. Yes, this is actually true. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. They stood for a moment in the doorway, not moving, taking a beat to let the weeks of distance collapse into now. Come in, she said. I'll make coffee. He came in. She made coffee, and he sat at her kitchen table, and the house did what houses do when someone fills them. It came to a different quality of life. She could feel it in the way the room sounded different, the way the air arranged itself. She set the cups on the table and sat across from him, and they looked at each other. Good drive? She asked. Long, he said. Worth it. She wrapped both hands around her cup. The assessment is submitted, she said. I know, I read it. Cole forwarded it? He did. A pause. The water sharing section was particularly good. Everything was particularly good, she said. It was strong work. He looked at her with the not-quite smile that she had been missing more concretely than she had managed to admit. Yes, he said. It was. She drank her coffee. How long are you staying? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I'd like to talk about that, he said. She looked at him. His expression was the fully present, unhurried version, the one that meant something considered was coming. Okay, she said. I've been thinking, he said, about what the direction looks like from here, practically. She felt something shift in her chest, not contraction, the opposite. Tell me, she said. The Northern Territory runs well without me at its center for periods of time, he said. I have good counsel. I have systems that work. The boundary dispute is resolved. The treaty review is complete. He paused. What I don't have, at the moment, is a reason to be in the North specifically. Other than that, it's where I've always been. She said nothing. She was listening. I am not, he said carefully, making a declaration. I'm telling you where I am in my thinking, because you prefer to know where people are in their thinking, because things that are implied without being stated create a kind of pressure that I've made some effort to remove from your life. She set down her coffee cup. Her hands were completely steady. Go on, she said. I'd like to spend more time here, he said, if that's something you want. Not all my time. I have obligations north, but more than visits. Something with more structure than occasional. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the garden was doing its afternoon things. She could hear the robin on the fence post. You're talking about something that doesn't have a name yet, she said. Yes, he said. I'm talking about making time and space to find out if it should have one. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the list. She thought about Mara in the kitchen and the door that opened from the inside. She thought about a Thursday evening 2 weeks ago and the words, to see you, simply. Yes, she said. I want that. He nodded. Something in him was still, the way he had been still in the garden on the last real Thursday, and she recognized it now for what it was, not the stillness of restraint but the stillness of relief. Good, he said. Good, she said. She picked up her coffee. I'll show you the vegetable bed after, she said. I finally finished it. I'd like to see it, he said. It's very organized, she said. I have a system. Of course you do, he said. She looked at him and he was close to smiling, genuinely, and she was close to smiling, genuinely, and the kitchen was full of that particular quality of warmth that comes not from any single thing but from the sum of all the things. And she thought, this is the thing I was afraid of losing before I had it. She had not lost it. She was sitting in it. He stayed for 10 days. 10 days was enough time to move from the relieved formality of arrival into the ordinary rhythm of two people occupying the same space, without the structure of work to organize around. She had not done this before, had never had someone present for the texture of her days without an agenda. She had expected it to feel like surveillance. It felt like the opposite. He worked in the mornings from the room she set up for him, with his Northern Territory council work, and the ongoing correspondence from his role. She worked at her own desk. They were in the same house and separate, and it was not awkward. It was, she realized with a slight shock, the most natural arrangement she had experienced. Like two people who knew how to occupy a shared space without colonizing it. They ate lunch together, most days. He cooked on alternate days, which she had not expected and which turned out to be something he was genuinely good at, not elaborate, but exact, which suited her. She was not a person who needed elaborate. She needed accurate. He met her father properly on the third evening. Victor Vasquez had been exercising enormous restraint for weeks, and Lena could see the cost of it in the careful casualness with which he greeted them at the door. The way he had clearly spent effort not spending effort. Cale saw it too. He accepted the hospitality with a directness that immediately put her father at ease. Not by performing warmth, but by being genuinely interested, asking questions about the territory's history that were specific enough to reveal he had done some reading, talking about the timber cooperative near the Eastern Corridor in a way that made clear he understood what it meant to the Pax economy. Her father, who had never in her adult life displayed approval of anyone she brought home because she had never brought anyone home, was visibly happy by the time they cleared the dinner plates. In the kitchen, washing up, he said quietly, "He's the real thing, Lena." She did not tell him she had already worked that out. "I know," she said. "He looks at you like—" He stopped. He handed her a dish to dry. "Like you're interesting," he said. "Not beautiful interesting. Interesting. The kind that doesn't wear off." She dried the dish. "I know," she said again. He nodded and went back to washing and did not say anything more about it, which was exactly the right amount. On the 7th day, they went to the ridge together. It was a clear afternoon with the specific quality of light that only existed at altitude in this season, slanted and gold and very clean. She had packed sandwiches and he carried the bag without asking, which was a small thing and not a small thing. They walked the trail as she had shown him the first time, but more slowly, with less talking, because it was the second time, and the second time allowed for quiet. At the ridge, they stood and looked north. The Doran peaks were bright with the residual season's snow, and the sky beyond them was the deep blue she had shown him before. She had her hands in her jacket pockets. He stood beside her with his arms slightly relaxed, the posture of a person who is not anywhere they don't want to be. "What's beyond the peaks?" she asked. "The northern lowlands," he said. "Flat country. Very cold in winter. The Pax settlements are mostly in the river valleys where the ground doesn't freeze as deep." "Have you always lived there?" "Almost always. I was sent south for 2 years of training when I was 17. The central region." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't like it at the time." She looked at him sideways. "What didn't you like?" "The politics were surface level," he said. "Everyone was very agreeable and nothing was actually agreed to. I was used to people saying what they thought. The central way of saying something sideways so everyone could pretend they hadn't said it was tiring." She thought about the Pax social she had attended every year since she was a child, and the number of conversations she had stood on the edge of thinking, "But what do you actually mean?" "I understand that," she said. "I thought you might." She looked at the mountains. "You never went back south after the training?" "Not until the treaty review," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Not until Crestwood," she said. "Not until Crestwood," he said. She turned back to the mountains. The peaks were doing what the peaks always did at this time of day, going slightly more gold at their edges as the sun moved. They were the same mountains she had looked at her whole life from this ridge, and they had never once told her anything about who was on the other side of them. Life did not typically work that way. The mountains gave you no information. The library doors opened and closed without warning. The plans you made with the best information available still left entire futures unaccounted for. She had spent a long time trying to account for everything. She was starting to understand the limits of that project. "I'd like to go north," she said. "When you go back, I'd like to see it." He turned. She was still looking at the peaks. "When?" he asked. "Whenever it makes sense," she said. "I have the paper submission in 3 weeks. After that." "After that," he said. "Yes." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the full, unperformed attention that she had once found alarming, and now found the way you find something that has become part of the landscape. Not surprising. Just there. And essential. "Is this strange for you?" she asked. "Being here instead of there?" He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "No," he said. "Strange would be wrong. It's unfamiliar. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "What's the difference?" "Strange suggests it's wrong," he said. "Unfamiliar just means I haven't done it before." She looked at the mountains. "I've been scared of unfamiliar things," she said. "I know. I think I've been calling them strange to justify the fear." "Possibly," he said, not agreeing automatically, considering. Or, possibly the fear was there first, and the label was just the nearest available word. She breathed in the clean ridge air. "Either way," she said, "I'm working on it." "You're further along than you think," he said. She was not sure about that, but she was not going to argue. She was going to stand on the ridge and look at the mountains and feel the good clean wind, and let the afternoon be what it was. They stayed until the light changed, then they walked down together. He left on the 10th day. She drove him to the northern road, Not the convoy this time, just his car, and a bag, and the particular quality of a departure that is not a goodbye. The difference between the two had been explained by the 2 weeks in 2 weeks, the calls, the visit after this. She stood by her car at the road edge. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he agreed. The paper submission, then north. I'll let you know when it's in. I'll be waiting. She looked at him. He was standing a few feet away, and the morning was gray again, and he was real, in the way that she now took for granted, which was a remarkable shift from 6 weeks ago, when his reality had been something she was still confirming. She crossed the few feet, and she held him briefly, both arms around him, her face against the shoulder of his jacket. He held her back without comment, without performance, the way he held most things, with attention and without demand. She stepped back. Drive carefully, she said. Always, he said. She got in her car. She drove home. She made coffee. She sat at her desk. She opened a new document on her computer, the final push for the research paper, the third section she had been putting off because it required the most precise thinking. She had been avoiding it not because she could not do it, but because it was the hardest part and she had not yet been ready to sit in the difficulty of it. She was ready now. She started writing. By the time her phone buzzed with a text from him 3 hours later, Doran Peaks looked good today. She was 9 pages into the third section, and it was going well. She typed back, "Tell them I'm coming to see them in 3 weeks." She put the phone down and kept writing. Outside her window, Crestwood was doing what it always did in the late part of the season that had started as a threat and become, somehow, the particular landscape in which she had stopped building walls and started building something else. She wrote until evening. She was more herself than she had been in years. She had not planned for this. She had not planned for any of it. She was beginning to think that was the best possible condition for the thing she had found. The paper went in at 11 at night on a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 2 days after he left Crestwood. She submitted it through the consortium portal, attached her supporting data files, wrote the covering note, and pressed send. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of her office and felt the particular hollow that follows the completion of something you have been working toward for a long time. She texted him, "It's in." The reply came within 2 minutes, which meant he was still awake. Good. Sleep. She smiled at her phone. Then she closed her computer and went to bed. She slept 12 hours and woke up feeling human in a way she had not felt in several weeks. The paper had taken everything she had in the final push. 3 sections revised, 2 sets of consortium comments addressed, the data appendix reformatted twice because the first format did not meet the journal requirements. She had been sustained through it by coffee and the Thursday calls and the knowledge that there was something on the other side of it. She spent the next day doing nothing research-related. She cleaned the house. She cooked something elaborate that her father came over to share. She went for a long walk on the North Trail in the afternoon, and found herself thinking about the Doran Peaks and how they would look from a different angle. She called him that evening without waiting for Thursday. "Is this allowed?" she said when he answered. "Non-Thursday calling?" "I wasn't aware of a restriction," he said, and she could hear the amusement in his voice. "I'm coming north in 4 days," she said, "if the timing still works." "The timing works," he said. "I'll have someone meet you at the territory border." "I don't need someone to meet me. I have a map." "I know you have a map," he said. "I'd still like someone to meet you." She considered arguing and decided it was not worth the energy. "Fine," she said. "Border at noon on Saturday?" "I'll be there," he said. A pause, comfortable, the kind of pause that had become as much a part of their conversations as the words. "How far is the drive?" she asked. 7 hours from Crestwood, he said. "You'll want to leave by 5. You're going to tell me to get enough sleep beforehand. You're going to stay up late anyway," he said. "I just want you to know I know it." She lay back on her bed and looked at the ceiling. "I'm nervous," she said. This was a disclosure she had not planned. It arrived the same way most honest things did with him, without permission and at the right time. He was quiet for a moment. "About coming north?" "About seeing your territory," she said. "About it being real. The thing we've been building in garden tables and Thursday phone calls. It's been in my space. My library, my trail, my kitchen, my garden. Now I'm going into yours. Does that feel like a threat?" he asked. Not dismissing, actually asking. She thought about it. "It feels like a test," she said, "which is probably the wrong framing." "Why the wrong framing?" "Because a test implies there's a possibility of failing," she said, "and I don't want this to have that architecture. The wall architecture. The way everything was structured around the possibility of a bad outcome." He was quiet again, and she knew he was thinking. Then don't frame it as a test, he said. Frame it as, you're coming to see something, the way you came to see the north from the ridge. You already saw it from a distance. Now you're going to see it from closer. She breathed. That's better, she said. I thought it might be. You think about things carefully, she said. I've been told, he said. It's occasionally alarming. She laughed. The first time she had laughed on a phone call with him, genuinely, without the professional buffer. It surprised her out of the thought before she finished having it. Get some sleep, he said. Even if it's late. I'll try, she said. I'll see you Saturday, he said. Saturday, she said. She put the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long time, and felt the nervous thing she had named, and the other thing underneath it, which was something much larger and much better. She left at 4:30 on Saturday morning, not 5, because she had packed the car the night before and woken before her alarm anyway. The drive north was 7 hours of roads she did not know, which required attention and did not allow for much of the anxious thinking she had been managing to avoid. The terrain changed around her as she drove, the familiar valley country giving way to something wider, flatter, then climbing again into territory that had a different quality of silence, a bigger sky, pine forests that went on longer than forests in the south had any business going on. She stopped once for coffee at a small town on the central road, a place with a single street and a convenience store with a coffee machine that was surprisingly good. She stood outside with the cup in both hands and looked north and thought, a little further. She crossed into the Northern Territories at 11:40, 20 minutes ahead of schedule. The border was a formal marker, a stone post and a sign, maintained and clear. She pulled over on the verge and called him. I'm at the border, she said. I know, he said. I can see you. She looked around. Down the road to the north, about half a kilometer, a single vehicle was parked on the verge. She looked at it. The door opened. She started her car. She drove the half-kilometer. He was standing by his vehicle when she pulled up, and the morning was clear and cold and the Doran Peaks were to the northwest. Very close now, sharper and more massive than they looked from the Crestwood Ridge. And the air was different here. What he had described as honest, she understood now. It was colder and cleaner and had less in it. It did not try to be comfortable. It just was. She got out of her car. She looked at him. He looked at her. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. How was the drive? 7 hours. 5.5, he said. You're early. I left early. Something moved in his face that was not quite a smile, as always, but was something that had learned to be the same. Are you hungry? He said. Or do you want to get to the territory first? She looked past him at the road going north into the peaks. The territory, she said. Food after. Okay, he said. Follow me. She got back in her car. She followed him. The Northern Territory opened around her as she drove, not dramatically, not in the cinematic way of revelation, but gradually, the way you understand a piece of music fully only after you have heard the whole thing. The settlements were as he had described, river valley communities, practical and well-maintained, with the particular character of places that have sustained themselves through conditions that required real effort to sustain. She had studied ecology for years. She had spent her career learning to read landscapes. This one was different from anything in her experience, not better or worse, but with a different set of answers to the questions a place has to keep answering. How do you feed yourself? How do you keep warm? How do you stay whole through the long winters? The answers were in the architecture of the buildings and the layout of the fields and the way the roads followed the natural contours of the valley floors rather than cutting through them. She drove through it and felt something she had not expected. She felt it could be home. Not replacing home. Not instead of Crestwood. Alongside. An additional direction in which her life could expand without the old one contracting. She had thought, for a long time, that spaces were fixed. That you were given your life and it had a shape, and adding to it meant something else had to be smaller. She was learning that the shape of a life was more flexible than that you could be a scientist from a pack in a valley, who was also a person standing in a northern territory, realizing that it was larger than her fear of it. She pulled into the main settlement behind his vehicle. He was waiting when she stepped out, and the mountains were close now, very close, and the air was very cold, and she stood in it, and breathed and felt the enormity of the day. Well, he said. It's real, she said. You thought it might not be? She looked at the peaks. I thought what we'd built might be a function of Crestwood, she said. Of my space. I thought putting it in a different space might change it. He looked at her steadily. And? She looked at him. He was in his territory, in his context. And he was exactly himself. The same person who had asked for the historical section and brought coffee to a garden table, and removed the claiming protocols without explanation, and listened to her talk about her sister at 2 a.m. on a flat roof, with the patience of someone who was going nowhere. Same, she said. He nodded once. Good, he said. Good, she said. She picked up her bag from the back seat. He fell into step beside her. The cold was genuine, and she could feel it through her jacket, and she thought, this is the honest cold. She would need a better jacket. She was already making a list. He had arranged for her to stay in a small guest house that was part of the settlement. It had been used for visiting PAC officials and was comfortable in the particular way of places designed for people doing serious things. She put her bag down and looked out the window at the peaks and then turned around, and he was leaning against the doorframe watching her. What would you like to see first? He said. She thought about it. Your council chamber, she said, where the territory decisions are made. He blinked. She had expected to surprise him, and was pleased to have managed it. Not the peaks, or the river. Those second, she said. I want to understand the work first. The place makes more sense once you understand the work. He looked at her for a moment, and the expression on his face was the specific one she had come to know as meaning something had landed correctly. Okay, he said, council chamber first. They spent 4 hours in the working parts of the territory. She asked questions about everything she saw with the same precision she brought to data, not making conversation but actually learning, the way she had always learned, by pushing on the parts that weren't immediately clear. He answered all of it. At some point, walking between 2 buildings, she realized they had been together for 4 hours, and the nervousness from Saturday morning had been completely replaced by something else entirely. Curiosity. That was what it had been replaced by. She was enormously curious about this place. Over dinner, made in the common kitchen of the settlement by 2 of the council members' partners, a substantial meal that turned out to be a quiet gathering of people who all worked with him and wanted to see what she was like, she found herself talking about her research in the way she talked about it with him, at full depth, without translating for a general audience, assuming comprehension. The people around the table kept up. They asked their own questions. By the time the meal was clearing, she had learned 4 new things about Northern PAC territory management that she hadn't known that morning. She said so. The woman across the table, a land manager named Iris who had the particular quality of someone who had done extremely hard work for a long time and had no need to prove it, looked at her with undisguised approval. You'll have to come back, Iris said. There's more. I intend to, Lena said. She felt him look at her when she said it. She did not look back right away. She let the words exist in the room first, let them be heard. Then she looked at him. He was watching her with the expression she had been accumulating since the library, and under the table he had his hand near hers on the bench, not holding, just adjacent, and she moved her hand slightly so they were touching, and that was where they stayed for the rest of the meal. Small, enormous, both. She stayed for 5 days. 5 days in the Northern Territory was enough to learn its seasonal character, the quality of the mornings there, colder and brighter than Crestwood mornings, with a particular silence before the work began that she found herself waking early to have. She sat in the guest house window on the second morning with her notebook and a cup of the strong northern tea, and wrote for 2 hours, not research but something else, the kind of writing she did not normally show anyone. He found her there at 8 when he came to collect her for the day's plans, and she closed the notebook without embarrassment because she had decided, somewhere between Saturday noon and Sunday morning, to stop covering her tracks. What are you writing? He asked. Personal things, she said. He looked at the notebook. Good? Good, she said. Better than I expected. When you said personal, still not going to show you, she said. But yes. It's connected to you. Most of the better things I'm writing these days are. He looked at her for a moment, and the morning was doing its northern best around them, and he said nothing, and his saying nothing was one of the most adequate responses she had received in years. On the 3rd day he took her to the peaks. Not to climb them. The weather was not right and the season was wrong for the upper trails, but to the base, where the rock came out of the forest floor and the scale of the thing became apparent in a way that photographs and distance never managed. She stood at the base and looked up and felt very small, in a way that was not uncomfortable but was honest. You can see Crestwood from the ridge at the top, he said, on the clearest days. She looked up at the rock. Can you see it today? Probably not. Cloud cover. She put her hand against the rock. It was cold and rough and very old. She pressed her palm flat and felt the particular age of it, the kind of age that makes human seasons seem like an afternoon. I've been afraid of things that weren't as permanent as this, she said. He stood beside her. Most things aren't as permanent as this. I mean, I structured my life around fears that wouldn't last, she said. Things I thought were walls but were actually just conditions. Changeable, like weather. Some walls are permanent, he said. Yes, she said, but the ones I built weren't. He was quiet. She took her hand off the rock and turned to face him. I want to say something to you, she said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. I want to say it clearly, she said, because I've been unclear for most of this season, and you've been patient with the unclearness, and I think you deserve the clear version. Okay, he said. She looked at the peaks above him and then at him. I am in love with you, she said. I've been in love with you since the library, probably. I didn't know it then, but I know it now, and I'm telling you, because things that are implied without being stated create a kind of pressure, and I have tried to remove that from this situation wherever I can. The peaks were enormous behind him, and he was very still the way he got when something arrived that had been waited for. I'm telling you not because I need you to say it back, she continued. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I'm done being careful with it. He looked at her for a moment. Then, Lena, yes, I have been in love with you since the library as well. She nodded once. Okay, she said. I was giving you time, he said. I know, she said. It was the right call. I needed the time. You don't need it anymore? I don't need it anymore, she said. He crossed the short distance between them, and he put his hand against the side of her face, and she leaned into it slightly, just enough, and then he kissed her in the clean cold air at the base of the Doran Peaks, and it was not tentative, and it was not performed, and it was the clearest thing she had experienced since walking into the library on a Tuesday in the middle of claiming season and answering a question about the historical section. She pulled back after a moment. She was still holding the front of his jacket. I have a confession, she said. He looked at her. What? I already knew, she said, that you were in love with me. I've known for weeks. He raised an eyebrow. And you still made the speech. I wanted to say it first, she said. I've been waiting to want things. I wanted to practice wanting them out loud. Something crossed his face that was the full version of the expression she had been accumulating. Not quite a smile. The actual thing. That is, he said, the most Lena possible reason for anything. I know, she said. I'm not apologizing. I'm not asking you to, he said. She released his jacket. She turned back to the peaks, and he turned with her, and they stood there with the mountains above them and the forest below and the honest cold doing its job on both of them. We still have the practical conversation ahead, she said. The distance, the two territories, my research, your obligations. Yes, he said. I don't know exactly how it works, she said. I don't either, he said. But we know the direction. She thought about that word. She had been thinking about it since he said it in her kitchen on the day he came back to Crestwood. Direction. Not a plan, not an architecture, not a system for managing the possibility of loss. Just a direction that two people had agreed to move in. Yes, she said. We know the direction. They walked back down through the forest together. She talked about the composition of the understory, different species than the south, different soil chemistry, and he listened and asked 2 questions and she answered them, and the walk was an hour and felt like 20 minutes. She drove home on Thursday. Not the Thursday call. She would not need the Thursday call this time because she would be driving through the afternoon and into the evening, down through the territory change, back into the familiar valley country, watching the sky change, and the forests thin, and the particular quality of the air shift back to the version she had grown up breathing. She arrived at Crestwood at 9 in the evening. She parked in her driveway, and she sat in the car for a moment and looked at her house. She had left 5 days ago as the person who had made the list. She was coming back as the person who had said the list out loud at the base of a mountain. She got out of the car. She went inside. She made tea. She sat at her desk. She opened her phone and sent him a single message. Home. The reply came in 1 minute. Good. Sleep. She smiled. She put the phone down. She opened her notebook to the page that said, What I Want. She read the 5 things, and the 6th thing she had added after the Friday night in Clara Street. Then she turned to a new page. She wrote the date. She wrote 1 sentence. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. She fell asleep while the tea was still warm. Autumn in Crestwood came differently than spring. Spring arrived as a threshold crossed overnight, but autumn crept in. A single tree going early in the east meadow, the mornings growing sharp, the light dropping 10 minutes earlier each week without announcement. She noticed it the way she noticed everything in the territory, through observation rather than announcement. She was also noticing herself more clearly than she had in years, which was a development she attributed partly to the research paper being finished and partly to the strange liberty of having said the true thing out loud at the base of a mountain, and found that the world did not rearrange itself around the saying. It stayed the same. She stayed the same. And he stayed exactly as he had always been. The consortium responded to her paper submission 6 weeks after she sent it. The response was long. 2 pages of rigorous comments, 3 substantial queries, and a paragraph at the end that she read 3 times to be sure she was reading it correctly. They were recommending acceptance pending revisions. The nitrogen data had been flagged as potentially field-changing. The Eastern Corridor section was noted separately as having significant implications for cross-pack territorial management beyond the central region. She sat with the letter for a long time. She called him that evening, not Thursday, not Friday, just that evening. The consortium responded, she said when he picked up. He went quiet in the specific way that meant he was paying full attention. And? Accepted pending revisions, she said. They flagged the nitrogen data as potentially field-changing. Good, he said. They also flagged the Eastern Corridor section, she said. They said it has implications for cross-pack territorial management. A pause. That is your research, he said. Used in a treaty that already changed 3 long-standing positions, now recommended for wider application. Another pause. Lena. I know, she said. That is significant work. I know, she said. But she wanted to hear him say it. She was learning to want the things that had always been available, and choosing to accept them. Are you celebrating? He asked. I'm sitting at my desk looking at the letter, she said. That is not celebrating. It's the first stage of celebrating, she said. The absorbing stage. How long does that stage last? About 2 hours, she said. Then Clara. Tell her to. He stopped. To what? Order something good, he said. For the occasion. She smiled at her desk. I will, she said. What are you doing tonight? Council review meeting, he said. It will go late. The Western Subpack boundary matter. I thought that was resolved. The documents are resolved. The people are still adjusting. People take longer than documents, she said. They do, he said. I'll call you tomorrow. And Lena. Yes. Congratulations, he said, genuinely. She held the phone a moment after they hung up, then she called Clara and told her to order something good. The revisions to the paper took 3 weeks. They were not minor. The consortium's queries were detailed and required her to go back into the raw data and run 2 additional analyses that she had not included in the original submission. She worked steadily through it, and the work was good, the kind of work that improved the thing rather than just responding to comment. Cale came back to Crestwood in the middle of the revision period, not for the treaty. The formal review was long complete, but because it was where he wanted to be, and where he wanted to be had started to carry more weight in his scheduling. She had stopped treating his arrivals as events that required preparation. She left him a key, which was its own quiet statement, and the morning he arrived she was at her desk working when she heard the front door, and she kept working for another 40 minutes because the work required it. He made coffee when he came in. He put a cup on her desk without interrupting. He went to the room she had cleared for his use and opened his own work. They worked like that until noon. Then she appeared in his doorway. I finished the 3rd query, she said. Send it to me, he said. She had not offered. He had not asked before. She looked at him. You want to read it? I read the original paper, he said. I want to see what you added. She sent it. They ate lunch together and talked about the boundary matter in the north, which was still not fully resolved at the human level even though the documents were signed, and she asked specific questions that he answered specifically, and at some point she said something that shifted the framing of the problem in a way he had not considered, and he sat back and looked at her with an expression she was familiar with, the one that meant, right, yes, that. How did you get there? He asked. It's the same structure as the Eastern Corridor, she said. 2 groups managing an overlap through informal agreement. You need to build the agreement into the relationship itself, not just the document. Give them shared language, shared vocabulary. Make the trust transferable by making it legible. He looked at her for a long moment. Will you put that in writing? For the council? You want me to write a brief for your council? I want you to put your analysis in a form they can use, he said. Yes. She thought about it. On one condition. He waited. Credit me on it, she said. Not as a source, as an author. He looked at her. Of course, he said. It would be yours. Did you think I would present it otherwise? No, she said. But I wanted to say it clearly. He nodded. You have been saying things clearly more lately. I've been practicing, she said. It suits you, he said. Everything suits me, she said. And he almost laughed, and she felt very good about that. The paper revisions went in on a Thursday. She was, apparently, a Thursday person in all the ways that mattered. The covering letter was concise and professional. She addressed each of the consortium's queries. She sent it, and then she sat back and she was done, and the paper was finished, and the thing she had been working toward for 2 years was complete. She did not feel hollow this time. She felt ready. Her father had them to dinner on the Sunday after she submitted the revisions. He had been having them to dinner with an increasing frequency that she was not going to comment on because it was clearly the expression of a happiness she had no desire to interrupt. He cooked the particular elaborate meal he only made for occasions he considered significant, and the three of them sat around the kitchen table and ate it while the candles her father had lit without comment on the occasion burned down through the meal. Victor Vasquez was a man who expressed himself primarily through attention and food, and the quality of his listening. He was listening that Sunday, with the specific fullness he brought to things he considered complete. After dinner, when the kitchen was being cleared, he handed her a dish and said quietly, "Your mother would have liked him." She dried the dish. Her chest did the thing it did when her mother was mentioned. The permanent ache, the one that had never stopped and never would, and that she had learned, over years, to carry without it stopping her. "I think she would have," she said. Her father nodded and went back to washing. She thought about what Mara had said on the front path, that their father was not less for loving their mother, that he was not broken by her loss, that he was just a person who missed someone very much. She had carried the lesson of her parents' story as a warning for years. She was learning to carry it as something else, as evidence that the risk was real but so was the life it purchased, and that her father would not trade the life even knowing the ending, and that this was a thing he had told her in 100 ways she had spent 11 years not hearing. She was hearing it now. She put the dried dish on the shelf and picked up the next one. October. The season was completely done. The last of the claiming season's formal events had closed 6 weeks earlier, and Crestwood had settled back into its interseason life, the rhythm of a pack going about its ordinary business without the additional frequency of the bonding calendar. Lena had noticed, somewhere in the middle of October, that she did not think about the claiming season as a thing she had survived. She thought about it as the thing that had happened alongside everything else. The season had run. The world had continued. Her life had changed in the ways that mattered. She was at the community hall on a Tuesday afternoon, dropping off the brief she had written for Cale's Northern Council, which he would carry north with him when he went back in the following week. She had written it with the same care she brought to all her work. Clear, precise, grounded in specific data. She was proud of it. On the way out she passed Alpha Cole in the corridor. He nodded to her with the warmth of a man who was genuinely pleased with how things had developed. "Dr. Vasquez," he said. "Alpha," she said. "The Eastern Corridor provisions," he said. "They're performing well." "I know," she said. "I've been monitoring." "Of course you have." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read and then said, "The consortium paper. I read the abstract when it was posted." She was surprised. "Already?" "They post accepted pending revisions," he said. "It circulated in the Treaty Administrative Network." He paused. "The implications for territorial management across the alliances. It's significant work." She stood in the corridor of her PAX community hall and felt the paper exist in the world as a real thing, being read by people she had not imagined reading it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "The queue," he said. "I'm sorry?" "The report that sat in the queue for 6 months," he said. "It should have been reviewed when it arrived. That was a failure of administration on my part. I wanted to say so directly." She looked at him. Alpha Cole was not a man who made this kind of statement easily. She could see that it had cost him something small to say. "Thank you," she said. "That matters." "I've adjusted the review process," he said. "Research above a certain classification level comes directly to the council now, with appropriate turnaround." "That's the right change," she said. He nodded once. "You have a good autumn," he said, and moved on down the corridor. She stood for a moment. Then she walked out into the October afternoon, and Crestwood was doing its autumn thing, and the trees were going in the east meadow, and the air had the sharpness she had always loved in the territory, and she walked to her car and sat in it and thought, good. Everything was good. She told him about the Cole conversation that evening. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished he said, "That was a harder thing for him to say than it might appear." "I know," she said. "How did it feel to hear it?" She thought about it. "Complete," she said. "Like a thing that needed to close." Good, he said. He adjusted the review process, she said. Future research gets direct council access. Then your report did two things, he said. The treaty provisions and that. She had not thought of it that way. She turned it over. I suppose it did, she said. You changed the system, he said, not grandly, just as a fact, by doing the work and refusing to accept that the work going nowhere was normal. She was at her desk. The lamp was on. The autumn dark was outside her window. She had been in this exact position so many times, in so many versions of this conversation, that the arrangement felt like a known thing. I'm coming north again, she said, before winter. I know, he said. Iris already emailed me to ask. She laughed. The full version, without the professional buffer, the way she laughed now, when things were actually funny. What did Iris say? She asked when the research consultant was coming back, he said. She also asked if the consultant would have time to look at the River Valley land use assessment. Tell Iris, she said, that the research consultant will have time for the land use assessment, and that she should send me the preliminary data before I arrive. A pause. She could hear him almost smiling. She's going to send it within the hour. Tell her to take her time, she said. I have a revision to finish first. I will tell her no such thing, he said. She will send it within the hour. She smiled at her desk. Outside her window the dark was complete and the stars were starting their work. She was, she realized, happy in a way she could not previously have described with precision, because she had not been in it to describe. She was in it now. She understood it from the inside. Sleep, he said. It's 9 o'clock, she said. You woke up at 5, he said. How do you know that? You texted me at 5, he said. She had forgotten that. I had an idea about the revision, she said. How did it go? Very well, she said. So you can sleep now, he said. She looked at the lamp. She looked at the revision on her screen. She looked at the notebook with the list. Yes, she said. Okay. Good night, he said. Good night, she said. She closed her laptop. She turned off the lamp. She got up from the desk and went to the window and looked out at the stars for a moment. Crestwood in October. The place she had always been. The place she would always come back to. And something else now. A direction that ran north through familiar territory into new ones. Into peaks that were honest rather than beautiful. Into a person who had walked into a library during claiming season and asked for the history section. She turned away from the window. She went to bed. She fell asleep in 4 minutes. Iris sent the preliminary data at 9 that night. Lena saw it when she checked her phone before bed and decided, despite what she had just told him, to open it. She read the first 3 pages standing in the kitchen in her pajamas and felt the particular click of her mind engaging with a new problem. The River Valley land use had 3 variables she had not encountered in the Eastern Corridor work, which meant the model would need adjustment. She took the phone back to bed and made notes for 40 minutes. She slept at 10. The following week she spent in the kind of extended creative thinking that happened only when the right conditions aligned. The paper was done, the revisions were in, the brief was written, and her mind was clear enough to see new problems rather than living inside old ones. The Iris data opened into something larger as she worked through it. The River Valley was a different system than the Valley Country in Crestwood, not just geographically but ecologically, and understanding it was going to require her to learn things she did not yet know. She found this exciting. The finding it exciting was itself significant. She had been, for most of the past 2 years, running on discipline rather than excitement. She had been producing good work through effort. Now the effort was lighter because the engagement was fuller, and she spent a lot of time thinking about why that was. Part of it was him. She did not find this embarrassing to acknowledge anymore. He had looked at her work as though it mattered, had used it in ways that had consequences, had asked her to write briefs for councils and adjust her framing, and go deeper on the questions that needed more depth, and all of this had steadily changed the way she approached her own work. She was working at a higher level than she had been 6 months ago. Not because her intelligence had changed, but because someone had treated it as worth fully using. She thought about the women in her pack who had bonded young and gradually organized their lives around their mates in ways that made them smaller. She thought about how she had generalized from those examples to a rule. She was revising the rule now, not abandoning the observation but recontextualizing it. The smallness she had seen was not an inevitable product of commitment. It was what happened when commitment was made to someone who did not understand or value the full size of the person they were committing to. Size was not static. You could grow or shrink in a relationship depending on who you were in it with. She was growing. She wrote this in her notebook one morning and then sat back and thought, that's it. That's the whole thing. She had been afraid of the wrong version of the thing. She had been afraid of a love that would make her smaller, and in trying to avoid it she had nearly missed the kind that made her larger, the kind that looked at her research as worth treating as urgent, and her mind as worth fully engaging, and her history as worth understanding, without requiring her to explain it twice. She was not going to finish becoming larger anytime soon. She had years of this ahead of her. That was not a problem. That was the whole point. November came in with the particular decisiveness of northern seasons. Not a gradual change, but a switch. The morning after the first heavy frost, she looked out her window, and Crestwood looked like a different place, cleaned and clarified. All the color that October had spread across the trees now compressed into the bare architecture of the branches. He arrived for the week before she went north. She had her bags partially packed already when he came through the door, and he looked at them with the expression of a man who was used to her being one step ahead of the schedule. "You're ready," he said. "I've been ready for 2 days," she said. "Did you sleep?" "Adequately." "Lena." "More than adequately," she said. "I've been good about sleep." He looked at her. "You slept more than 5 hours?" "Every night this week," she said. "I have been exemplary." He almost smiled. And now she understood the almost smile in all its variations, the gentle version and the amused version, and the version that meant something had settled. This was the gentle version. "Good," he said. She had made dinner and it was good, and they ate it at the table she had eaten at her whole life, in her father's house where she had grown up, because she had invited her father and Clara and Owen and Priya, and they had all come and filled the house with the particular warmth of people who belong in the same room. Her father had brought wine, Clara had brought dessert. Owen had told a story that was only funny in the specific context of people who understood the migration data, and Lena had laughed at it harder than anyone, and caught Cale looking at her with the particular version of attention that meant he was recording something. She raised an eyebrow at him across the table. He shook his head slightly, just noting, not translating. She turned back to the conversation. She was aware of all of it, the room, the people, her father at the head of the table with his wine glass and his quiet happiness. Clara leaning forward to say something into Owen's ear and smiling. Priya telling Cale something about the River Valley data with genuine enthusiasm, because Priya knew her well enough to know he would be interested. She looked at all of it. She thought, I built this. Not alone, but I was part of building it. Every choice I made that did not wall myself in. She had come so close to missing it. She had nearly made the walls permanent. She had nearly let the fear of the worst version stop her from the best one. She was not going to think about that for long. It was a near miss, and near misses deserved acknowledgement, and then the releasing of the acknowledgement. She was here. That was the fact that mattered. She left for the north on a Monday morning with 7 hours of driving and the IRIS data reviewed and the brief in her bag and the knowing that she was going somewhere she had already been, and that the second time was the beginning of a pattern. She crossed the border at 11:40 again, 20 minutes ahead again, because she had left early again, and when she called him he said, I can see you, and the door of the vehicle down the road opened and she drove the half-kilometer. You're early, he said. I wanted to be, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. The Doran peaks were behind him in the November cold, snow further down the slopes than last time, sharper and more present. Iris has a full schedule for you, he said. I know, she said. She emailed it. She also emailed me, he said, to say she added 2 things to the schedule without asking. I know, she said. I replied that it was fine. He shook his head slightly. You two are going to be very productive, she said. I was going to say a problem, he said, but yes, productive. She got back in her car. He got back in his. She followed him north into the territory, past the settlements and the river valleys, toward the peaks that were now more familiar than they had been 2 months ago, toward a place that was becoming legible to her, the way all landscapes became legible with time and attention. She was a scientist. She learned by looking closely and returning often, and being willing to revise her model when the data did not fit her previous understanding. She had revised many models this year. She had a long list of better ones. She drove north, and the road was clear, and the sky was the northern blue, and the peaks were getting closer, and she was going into the second visit of what she was now certain would be many, and she was. She realized with a completeness she had not previously had access to, exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because fate had put her there, because she had chosen it. Every Thursday at a time, every careful question, every evening when she could have called Clara and called him instead, every wall she had put down rather than built, every piece of research she had let matter, every morning she had opened her notebook and been honest on the page. All of it had been a direction, accumulating. And the direction had brought her here. The Doran Peaks received her. She was listening. Winter in the Northern Territories was a different kind of animal than winter in Crestwood. Lena had known this intellectually before she arrived for her second visit. She understood it differently now, not as information but as physical experience. The cold was not the cold she knew. It was deeper, more honest as he had described it. It went through you rather than settling on you. The mornings were a particular shade of dark blue that the South did not have, and the silence before the work began was a silence with depth to it, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. She loved it immediately. She had not expected to love it. She had expected to find it interesting and uncomfortable and worth studying. Instead, she put on the heavier jacket she had bought specifically for this trip, walked out of the guest house at 6 in the morning on the second day, and stood in the dark blue silent cold and felt entirely at home. She texted him, "Your weather is trying to tell me something." His reply came in 1 minute. "What does it say?" She stood in the cold and thought about it. "Come back often," she typed. A pause. Then, "That is what it says." She went inside and made tea and sat at the window with her notebook and wrote for an hour before the settlement woke up. The Iris schedule was, as promised, full. The River Valley land use assessment turned out to be more complex than the preliminary data had suggested. There were 3 competing factors she had not fully accounted for in her initial review: water temperature variance across the valley system, a soil mineral gradient that ran northeast to southwest rather than the north-south orientation she had assumed, and a relationship between canopy cover and understory plant succession that the local ecologists had been observing for years but had not yet formally mapped. She spent 2 days with the local team working through the data. They were precise and knowledgeable and entirely skeptical of her preliminary conclusions, which was the correct response, and she met their skepticism with the same rigor she brought to consortium reviewers and found, by the end of the second day, that she had substantially revised 2 of her 3 working hypotheses and felt better about all of them. Iris was watching this process from across the room, with the expression of someone reassessing a first impression upward. "Your methodology," she said at the end of the second afternoon. "The way you revise in real time. Most consultants defend their initial positions until the data is overwhelming. Defending a position that the data doesn't support is just expensive delay," Lena said. "Yes," Iris said. "But most people find it more comfortable." "I find revising more comfortable," Lena said. "It means you're closer to right." Iris looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone filing something for later use. "When can you come back?" she said. "Spring, when the valley systems are active." Lena thought about spring. She thought about the research paper, published by spring if the revisions were accepted. She thought about the Eastern Corridor follow-up assessment that was due in March. She thought about Crestwood in spring, which was the season she loved most in her territory, the one she had always arranged her schedule around. "March," she said. 10 days. I'll want to see the melt season flow data." Iris pulled out her calendar. He found her at the end of the second data day, in the guest house common room where she was writing up her revised notes. She looked up when the door opened, and he came in with 2 cups and sat across from her at the low table. "How is it going?" he said. "Better than I thought," she said. "I was wrong about 2 things. I'm right about the third, more specifically now that I understand the first 2. He handed her a cup. She took it. "Iris cleared my schedule tomorrow afternoon," he said. She looked at him. "Iris controls your schedule?" "When she decides something is important," he said. "She said the River Valley data needed another full day with you before you left." "She could have told me that." "She told me," he said. "She thought I might have plans for tomorrow afternoon." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "And do you?" "I did," he said. "I'm flexible." "Good," she said. "Because I do want the full day with the data." She looked at him. "But I want the evening." "The evening," he said, "is not on Iris's schedule." "Good," she said. He looked at her in the way that had always been full attention without performance, and the common room was quiet and warm and she felt the particular quality of being known, not completely, not without remainder, but sufficiently and correctly, in the ways that matter. "How much longer do you think you'll need the River Valley assessment?" he said. "Before it's complete, multiple visits," she said. "It's a larger system than the Eastern Corridor, more variables, more interactions." She paused. "It's also more interesting." "Interesting enough to draw you north?" "North is already drawing me north," she said. "The assessment is an additional reason." He looked at his cup. She waited. "I've been thinking," he said, in the voice that meant something considered was arriving. "Tell me," she said. "The guest house," he said. "It's fine for a visitor, It's not a good working space for someone doing sustained field research. She looked at him. She was listening carefully. There's a house in the eastern part of the settlement, he said. It's been empty since autumn. It belongs to the Pack territory. It comes with full access to the Valley System data, the local ecology records going back 30 years, and proximity to the council chamber if the research has administrative implications. He paused. I thought you might want to look at it. She held her cup. She looked at his face. Cale, she said. It's not a statement, he said. It's a practical offer. For a researcher who is going to need to be in this territory for multiple extended periods, as a working base. She raised an eyebrow. It's not a statement. It is also a statement, he said. I am trying to be clear about both. She put her cup down. She sat back. She thought about the list in her notebook, the one she had added to and revised over months. She thought about the 6th thing she had written after Clara Street. She thought about the sentence she had written the night she came back from the north the first time. Can I see it tomorrow? She said. He was still for a moment. Yes, he said. After the data session with Iris, she said. After the data session, he said. Good, she said. He looked at her steadily. Is that a yes, or is it? It's a yes to looking, she said, because I need to see things to understand them. But Cale, she looked at him directly. You know what looking means, in this context. You know I don't look at things I'm not considering. He looked back at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. I know that. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat in the quiet for a moment. The common room was warm, and the cold outside was the northern kind, and the Doran Peaks were out there in the dark, doing what they had always done, not requiring any comment. Say the rest, she said. What rest? He said. The thing after, practical offer, she said. The statement part. He was quiet. He was looking at the table. Then he looked at her. I want you to have a place here, he said. That is yours, independent of me, and also near me. Something that means you can be in this territory on your own terms rather than mine. She held that. She turned it. And the near you part? She said. He looked at her in the way that was not the not quite smile but the whole thing. The near me part is the part I want most, he said. But it can't be the only reason, or it's the wrong architecture. She stared at him. You used my word, she said. It's a good word, he said. She picked up her cup. She drank the last of it. She looked out the window at the northern dark. Tomorrow, she said, after the data session. After the data session, he confirmed. She went back to her notes. The data session the next day ran 5 hours. Lena went deep on the soil mineral gradient with 2 of the valley ecologists, rebuilt part of the model, lost the model, found it again in a better form. Iris circled around the edge of the work periodically, adding context and pulling data files from the archive, with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was and had been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. At 3 in the afternoon she put down her pen and looked at what she had, and it was good. Not complete. It would never be complete in a single visit. That was not how ecological work operated. But substantially advanced, better than the morning, pointed in the right direction. March, Iris confirmed from across the room. 10 days. 10 days, Lena confirmed. Iris nodded with the satisfaction of a project manager who has secured an adequate resource commitment. He was waiting outside when she emerged, coat on, 2 cups of something hot that turned out to be the spiced drink she had tried at the settlement dinner, and liked without saying so explicitly. She looked at the cups. You remembered. I pay attention, he said. They walked east through the settlement. The afternoon was clear and cold, and the Doran Peaks were brilliant in the late light, snow-bright and enormous. The eastern part of the settlement was quieter than the central area, residential rather than administrative, houses with good spaces between them, the particular quality of a neighborhood that had developed organically rather than been planned. The house was the third from the end of a lane that curved toward the valley slope. It was not large. It had been built with the northern practicality she had come to associate with this territory. Solid, functional, facing south to make the most of winter sun. There was a porch and a garden that was currently just frozen ground, but that would clearly be something in spring. And a study at the front with a window that faced across the settlement toward the river valley in the distance. She stood in the study. She looked out the window. The view took in the valley slope and the lower reach of the eastern peak and, on the far right edge of the window, a sliver of the settlement center where the council building stood. She stood there for a long time. He was behind her in the doorway. He did not come in. He was giving her the space to be in the room without him in it, so that what she understood about it would be hers. She appreciated that. She had always appreciated that. What did the previous occupant use this room for? She said. Administration, he said. Land records. Good bones for research, she said. I thought so too, he said. She turned around. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms slightly folded, and the expression she had accumulated across months. Full attention, no demand, entirely there. She looked at the room. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she had told herself she did not want, and all the things underneath those things that she had always wanted, but had been afraid to name. She thought about the door that opened from the inside. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes? Yes, she said. I want this. The house, the north, what it means. He was very still for a moment. Then he came into the room, across it, and he put his arms around her, and she leaned into it with her face against the shoulder of his jacket where she had put it briefly once on a Friday street in Crestwood, and this time she was not brief about it. They stood in the empty study in the winter afternoon, and outside the window the door and peaks were going gold, and the settlement was doing its evening work, and somewhere down the lane a door opened and closed, and a light came on in a neighboring window. She pulled back and looked at him. You knew I was going to say yes, she said. I thought you might, he said. Since when? He looked at her for a moment. Since you sent the research report to me, he said. The first one. That same night. She stared at him. That was 2 months before we had the conversation in the garden. Yes, he said. I sent it for professional reasons, she said. He raised his eyebrows in a single expressive movement. I sent it primarily for professional reasons, she said. Yes, he said. And also you sent it that same night. Immediately. After thinking about it. She looked at the ceiling briefly. You should have told me sooner. You needed the time, he said. I keep hearing that. It keeps being true, he said. She shook her head. She turned back to the window. The peaks were very gold now, the particular gold of late afternoon at altitude, and the view from this window had depth and space and the kind of openness that she had always associated with the feeling of having room to work. I'm going to rearrange this room, she said. Completely your decision, he said. I want the desk facing the slope, she said, not the settlement. Also completely your decision. And I'll need a better internet connection, she said, for the consortium communications. Iris can arrange it. Of course Iris can arrange it, she said. She turned around again and looked at him standing in what was going to be her room, in what was going to be her house, in a territory that was becoming a second direction in which her life was expanding. I'm not giving up the Crestwood garden, she said. I know, he said. Thursday evenings on the phone still happen when we're not in the same place, she said. They do, he said. And my research is still mine, she said. The direction I take it, the conclusions I draw, the papers I submit, those are mine. Yes, he said. And I will keep asking to read them. Yes, she said. You will. She looked at him. He looked at her. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Outside the window the peaks were deepening to something approaching amber. The honest cold of the north was doing its work on the glass, condensation forming at the edges. She watched it for a moment. She thought about the list. She had written it in the small hours of a night when she had been very far from here, in every sense of the word. She had written 5 things and then a 6th, and then, on the night she came home from the first northern visit, a 7th. She had not yet told him what the 7th thing was. I wrote something in my notebook, she said. When? He said. The night I came home from my first visit here, she said. After you told me you already knew you were staying. He waited. I wrote the date, she said. And then I wrote, I am going to spend a long time learning the North. He was quiet. That was the 7th thing on my list, she said. He looked at her. The study was full of the failing afternoon light, and the peaks were amber gold in the window, and the settlement was lighting up behind them, warm windows in the early dark. What were the first 6? He said. Personal, she said. He almost smiled. The full version. Of course, he said. But the 7th, she said, is relevant to you. I gathered, he said. She turned to the window. She looked at the peaks in their amber. I've been afraid most of my life, she said, of needing things. Of the cost of needing things. I built a very sophisticated system for not needing. She paused. That system is not serving me anymore. I noticed, he said. I've been watching it dismantle. It was not graceful, she said. It was honest, he said. That's better. She was quiet for a moment. The peaks were still doing their thing. They would keep doing it. They had been doing it for longer than anything she could imagine, and they would keep doing it long after she was gone. There was something stabilizing about that. Something that put the fear in proportion, not erasing it, just putting it in its appropriate small place in a very large landscape. "I love you," she said. Not because she had not said it before, because she was saying it here, in this room, in this light, with the whole of what they were standing in visible around them. He was behind her, and then beside her, and they stood together at the window. "I know," he said. "I love you too. You're not going to make it more elaborate than that?" she said. "No," he said. "It doesn't need to be." She leaned against him slightly. He was solid the way things are solid when they have been built rather than performed, and she had been leaning against that solidness for months in small ways, and this was just the full version of what had always been true. The peaks went from amber to something darker, the last of the afternoon giving up cleanly. She was not afraid of the dark here. She had not been afraid of anything for a while now, and the relief of that, the enormous, daily, quiet relief of it, was something she was only beginning to understand fully. She would understand more of it in the spring. She would come back with better questions and more data and a revised model, the way she always did when she was learning something that mattered. She would come back many times. She intended to get very good at the North. She intended to get very good at this. She had been getting good at it for months already, one Thursday at a time, one careful question, one open door, one piece of evidence set against the older evidence, one revision that made everything clearer and more right and more hers. Outside the window, the first stars of the northern evening were coming in. She recognized them. She was already learning where they were from here,